So, what had happened last time? If I remember right, uh, we had Hayaba Akihiko pop in and be like, "Hey boys, I'm not dead," and then he was like, "By the way, we just Sword Art Online doll you guys again," something like
Is
that.
this legal?
I mean, call
Oh,
it creative liberty because it's not like he trapped them in a game. He trapped them in a verti. He didn't exactly trap them. He just made it so that they can't really log off, but he doesn't really mean it. So technically, you know, it's kosher because he didn't really mean to do the thing.
Oopsie doodle, my
Oop-
bad.
Oopsie poopsie.
I don't even remember when I
oops.
fell asleep.
Yeah, we all just popped off and was like, "Oh wait, what happened to Melon?" He just he just fell asleep.
Oh, Melon's fucking dead.
I can't believe he actually died. It's the dies from cringe gif, but like for real.
If you die in the read along, you die in real life.
Look, it's literally you,
Oh
Melon.
god.
Uh,
Okay. So yeah, if I remember right, he was just like, "All right, here, Link start, boys. It's time to play the game." And here we are, level 5.
Enko stato.
Fucking weeps. Level 5. It's cool to use the computer. Don't let the computer use you. There's a war going on. Battlefield's in the mind, and the prize is the soul. As the panic subsided, H, Shoto, and Faisal began feverishly tapping at the icons on their HUD menus, sending texts or making panicked phone calls to their loved ones. Aside from all my loved ones were already in the room with me, so I didn't text or call anyone. I was too busy hyperventilating, thinking, this is all my fault, over and over again. After each repetition, I clenched both fists and pounded them against my forehead. I couldn't make myself stop. This sort of thing had happened to me a few times as a teenager, but I haven't had a meltdown like this in years, and I'd never experienced one while logged into the Oasis. I'd also never behaved like this in front of HR Shoto or Arthremus either, a realization that only compounded my shame even further, and made me attempt to pound myself in the skull even harder. Luckily, it wasn't my real skull I was punching, or my real fist I was using to punch it. It was all a simulation, and the Oni's pain inhibitors and anti-masochism protocols prevented me from feeling anything but mild discomfort each time I hit myself. But I still couldn't seem to pull out of my shame spiral, not until I felt a pair of small, strong hands take hold of my wrist, restraining them. Wade? I heard Arthur whisper, please stop. The tenderness in her tone, which had once been so familiar to me, now felt completely foreign. Hearing it again was like a knife in my heart. I turned to see Arthremis standing there, restraining my arms in her vice-like grip. Calm down, okay? She said. It's gonna be alright. She let go of my wrists and took hold of my hands instead, forcing open my clenched fists so that she could interlace her fingers with mine. I need you to breathe, Wade, she said. She gave me a comforting smile and squeezed both my hands. I'm here with you. Be here with me. That finally snapped my brain out of its toxic thought loop. I relaxed my hands and she let go of them. Then she rested her own hands on my shoulders and gave them a brief squeeze. There he is, she said. All good in the neighborhood, Z? Yeah, thank you, I said, turning away sharply in embarrassment. It was just I think I may have had a panic attack, but I'm better now. Good, she said, because I need you to get your head in the game. Everyone does, okay? I nodded and took a deep breath. Then I took a few more. Once I'd calmed down, I pulled up my HUD to check my vital signs. They all looked normal. Then I decided to check the operational status of my Oasis immersion vault and discovered that my situation was even more fucked than I thought. I no longer had the ability to unlock or open my motive's armored canopy. Both of those functions had been disabled, but I could still see myself and my surroundings via the motive's interior and external camera feeds, and thankfully, the motive's mobility, defense, and weapon system were still functioning normally and still under my control. So I could still defend myself if I needed to. The only thing I couldn't do was get out. Each motive unit had an emergency release protocol, but you had to power down your Oni headset before it could be activated. And to power down your headset, you first needed to log out of the Oasis. And thanks to Anorak's in firmware, I couldn't do that. In the calmest voice I could muster, I told the others about my discovery. H, Shoto, and Faisal immediately checked their own OIV control menus and discovered they had the exact same problem I did. We each owned different immersion vault models, but they all had the same failsafes built into them. Guys, Shoto said, what the hell are we going to do? Faisal was listening intently to several different phone calls. He shouted one at a time to whoever it was he had on the line. Then he regained his composure. I've got one of our chief engineers on the phone right now, he announced, and he can't figure out a way to unlock his vault either. According to him, the firmware on our OIVs has not been altered in any way. It just isn't functioning properly now due to the changes in Anorak's in firmware. Faisal threw up his hands in a helpless gesture. We won't be able to attempt a Lobo logout, even as a last resort. A Lobo logout was the slang term for what happened when someone's Oni headset malfunctioned or lost power before their Oasis logout sequence could be completed and their brain was properly awakened from its dreamlike state. 9 times out of 10, a Lobo logout left the wearer in a permanent coma, but a few hardy souls managed to wake up and recover their faculties, the way some people were able to bounce back after a major stroke. Several of these survivors described being trapped in an endless loop of the final second of the simulation they were experiencing before they lost their connection. A loop that seemed to stretch on for months or years. GSS never allowed the public to find out about that last bit, though. Lobo logouts were an extremely rare occurrence because each Oni headset had 3 redundant onboard computer systems and 3 fail-safe batteries. These batteries were small, but with a full charge, each one could keep the headset in operation long enough for it to complete its wearer's logout and wake-up sequence, which was triggered automatically when the headset switched to battery power. When the redundancies failed, it was almost always a result of sabotage, either by a user who was looking to end it all, or the user's family member who was looking to get rid of them and or cash in on their life insurance policy. As a result, GSS wasn't held legally accountable for any of these incidents, although, thanks to the licensing agreement our users clicked past before each login, if our Oni headsets had started making people's head explode like watermelons at a Gallagher concert when they put them on, we probably wouldn't be liable for that either. That was real comforting. Up until now, I think H, Shoto, and I had all been thinking the same thing. If Anorak failed to release us before we hit our Oni usage limits, a Lobo logout with a 10% chance of survival was better than no chance at all. But Anorak had robbed us of that option too. Even cutting off the power wouldn't help. With the logout disabled, the redundancies designed to save users would instead power the headsets long enough to push each of us past our daily Oni usage limits. Each of those backup batteries held more than enough juice to cook our frontal lobes. The armored shell of my tactical immersion vault was designed to be indestructible and impregnable. Even if I disabled all of its defenses and ordered a security team with plasma torches to come down into my bunker and start cutting open my vault right now, they wouldn't be able to get my body out of it for at least a day or two. I would be long dead from synaptic overload syndrome by then, and H, Shoto, and Faisal were all in the same boat. And so was every other Oni user with an Oasis immersion rig. Anorak had thought of everything. Every precaution we had taken to protect our bodies and our brains was now being used against us. People often jokingly referred to OIVs as coffins. Now, that felt terrifyingly prophetic. Z, H said, I see those wheels of yours turning over there. What's your assessment of our situation? That we're totally screwed, pal, I said, at least for the time being. H let out a roar and punched the wall in frustration. This shit is unbelievable, she said. Faisal, how the hell did our admins let this happen? We're always saying we have the smartest people on the planet working for us, right? And the best cybersecurity infrastructure ever to exist in human history? Some shit like that? We do, Faisal said, but we never anticipated an attack by an AI copy of our deceased CEO. How the hell were we supposed to prevent that? He grabbed a fistful of his own hair in each hand as if preparing to yank it all out. He had unrestricted admin access to our entire internal network. All of our safeguards were to prevent someone on the outside from hacking into our network. Anorak already had the key to the front door. It doesn't matter now, he said. Just tell the engineers to keep working on a solution, okay? They are, sir, he said, giving me a grim smile, like their own lives depend on it. Good, I replied. In the meantime, we'll try to give the Dixie Flatline what he wants and hope he makes good on his promise to release us. I glanced back over at H and Shoto. They both nodded mutely in agreement. We all looked at Arthremis, but she appeared to be lost in thought. She also appeared to be the only one who had fully regained her composure. Maybe because she was the only person present whose brain wasn't currently being held hostage. She walked back over to the conference table and turned to address us all. I winced, bracing myself for the worst. This was her moment to shout, I fucking told you so, morons, at the top of her lungs. Because she had told us many, many times, and now she might pay for our hubris with her own life, along with 500 million other innocent people. It was all our fault, and she would have had every right to say so. But I should have known. That wasn't her style. We can handle this, she said, making eye contact with each of us in turn. Anorak isn't some super genius. He said it so himself. He's only as smart as James Halliday was when he was alive. She made a show of rolling her eyes. Halliday might have been a genius with computers, but we all know he was a total idiot when it came to understanding other people. He never understood human behavior, which means Anorak will understand it even less, especially since Halliday erased a bunch of his memories. We can use that to our advantage. But this isn't Halliday we're dealing with here, H said. It's Anorak. He read the entire internet. Now he knows everything about everything. Yeah, Shoto said, because there isn't any false information on the internet at all. Hey, Arthur said, snapping her fingers at us like an annoyed schoolteacher. I don't want to hear one more word of negativity, guys. You got that worth a high five. We beat Anorak once before, remember? And if we work together, we can do it again, right? H and Shoto both nodded silently in agreement, but their faces seemed to give a different answer. Parzival? Arthur said, locking eyes with me. Back me up here. I met her gaze. You tried to warn us, I said. I'm sorry I didn't listen. Being sorry isn't gonna save anyone, she replied. Even I couldn't have predicted something this fucked up would happen, but now that it has, it's up to us to try and fix it, right, Z? I took a deep breath. Right, I said. I'm sorry I lost my cool before. I've got my game face on now. Good, Arthur said, because we need to figure out what we're going to do and do it ASAP. She tapped an invisible watch on her wrist. Like Riceland said, tick-tock. Agreed, I said. But before we start discussing our game plan, we need to make sure Anorak isn't still here in this room eavesdropping on everything we say. I turned to address everyone. He has the robes of Anorak now. If they give him all the same abilities they gave me when I wore them, they gave me unrestricted super user access to the Oasis. They also made my avatar invulnerable and invincible in combat, and they allowed me to go anywhere I wanted in the simulation, anywhere, and they let me remain invisible and undetected to other avatars, even in null tech and null magic zones. I could also eavesdrop on private phone calls and access private chat rooms too, just like Og did when he eavesdropped on us in H's basement. Arthur, Shoto, and H all appeared to be processing this new information, but not Faisal. We may have a solution here, he replied. We've been aware of the Rose powers for a long time now. Halliday used to use them occasionally when he wanted to travel around the Oasis undetected, just like you, Mr. Watts. He gave me a knowing smile. But we managed to isolate the unique item identification code that Halliday assigned to the robes of Anorak when he created them. We still can't pinpoint their location in the Oasis, but we can detect the item's presence within a defined volume. He opened a browser window in front of his avatar and spun it around to face us. It displayed a three-dimensional wireframe diagram of our conference room, with each position of our avatars indicated by a glowing blue outline. When Anorak revealed himself, our Oasis admins immediately conducted a server-side scan of this room, Faisal explained. This shows us everyone and everything located inside it, regardless of whether or not it's visible to the room's other occupants. He tapped a few buttons, and the wireframe diagram of the room began to rewind like a video recording, showing our avatars moving and walking around the conference room in reverse. Faisal paused the recording a few seconds before Anorak disappeared. The system classified him as an NPC, so his avatar appeared with a red outline around it. Faisal hit play on the recording, and when Anorak teleported away, the outline of his avatar vanished from the room too. As you can see, he really did teleport away, Faisal said, and he didn't leave behind any monitoring or recording devices, or we would be able to detect those too. He turned to me. So, there's no way Anorak could be listening to us right now. Unless those robes give you the ability to remotely eavesdrop on other users no matter where they are? I shook my head. No, I said. The wearer has to be in the same Oasis location or logged into the same chat room to listen in on them. Jesus, H said, shaking her head. So much for our famous user privacy policy. Are you sure there's no other way Anorak could be spying on us? Shoto asked Faisal. Perhaps via some other modification he made to his infirmware? Faisal waited to get an answer from his engineers. Then he smiled and shook his head. The admins tell me it's impossible, Faisal told us. There's no way to tap a person's ONI connection to the Oasis and filter out just the audio or visual data. All the sensory input and output is streamed simultaneously. They say it can't be done. Maybe not by them, Shoto said, but if Anorak is a copy of Halliday, he probably understands the Oasis even better than our engineers. Why am I thinking of that scene in Heat? Arthur asked us. The one where Pacino is starting to close in on De Niro and he tells his crew, assume they got our phones, assume they got our houses, assume they got us, right here, right now as we sit, everything. Assume it all. He looked at me, H, and Shoto. I think it might be wise for us to observe the same policy from here on out, just to be safe. I nodded. If we need to say something to each other so that we don't want Anorak to hear, we should do it in this room. Do we have any idea of finding out where Anorak is right now? Faisal closed his browser window and shook his head. When Halliday created Anorak and released him inside the simulation as an autonomous NPC, he gave him the ability to move around the Oasis freely, uninhibited and undetected by our admins, just as Halliday and Moro's own avatars have always been able to. I found myself wondering if Findoro's tablet of finding would be able to help us locate Anorak. Then I remembered that artifact only gave you the ability to locate other avatars. It didn't work on NPCs, and the admin said the system classified Anorak as an NPC, and there were no artifacts that gave you the ability to locate an NPC because it would break every single Oasis quest that involved tracking one down. Probably at least half of them. Thankfully, we have come up with a way for you to detect Anorak if he comes into your immediate vicinity, Faisal said. He opened his inventory and removed 4 plain-looking silver chains. Then he gave one to each of us. These are bracelets of detection linked to the robes of Anorak, Faisal continued. They will begin to glow bright red if the robes come within a 100-meter radius of your current location. That should prevent Anorak from sneaking up on you. Nice, I said, slipping my bracelet on. Please thank the engineers for us. Arthur put her bracelet on too. Then she turned to face me. Okay, she said, spill it, Watts. What's this big red button that Anorak mentioned, and what does it do exactly? I'd been dreading this question, but under the circumstances, I had no choice but to answer it truthfully. The big red button is a self-destruct mechanism for the Oasis, I said. It's located inside Castle Anorak in the study, a room that only the wearer of the robes of Anorak can enter. If you press it, it will shut down the entire Oasis and launch a tapeworm that will erase all our backup servers, destroying the simulation forever. Everyone's eyes widened in surprise. For a second, Faisal looked as if he might faint. Holy shit, Z, H said. Why didn't you ever tell any of us about this? Halliday showed me the big red button in secret, so I decided to keep it a secret. I shook my head, and I honestly couldn't foresee a single reason why I would ever need to press it. That made Arthremis laugh out loud. Well, can you foresee one now, Nostradamus? She asked. I gave her a sober nod. Yes, ma'am, I replied. Now I can think of several. Why would Mr. Halliday be reckless enough to build a self-destruct mechanism into the Oasis? Faisal asked, still shaking his head in disbelief. He knew there would be disastrous consequences if the Oasis ever went offline and stayed that way. We conducted several studies involving dozens of simulated scenarios. He turned to me. Mr. Watts, if you or anyone else ever presses that button, it would disrupt global communications, law enforcement, transportation, and commerce. The world would be thrown into complete chaos. Shoto nodded. The entire drone protection force would go on offline and remain offline, he added. There would be shipping delays, food and medicine shortages, rioting, markets would crash, states would fall. He shook his head. Jesus, the whole of human civilization might even collapse. Then why would Halliday take such an insane risk? Faisal asked. It's better to have a self-destruct and not need it than to need one and not have it, Arthur said. I nodded. Exactly. So that's why Anorak went through all that trouble to steal the rose back? Shoto asked. To keep Z from pressing that button? If I erased the Oasis, Anorak would be erased along with it, I said. Now he doesn't have to worry about that anymore. Everyone fell silent for a moment. Arthemis began to pace back and forth while chewing absent-mindedly on one of her thumbnails. Samantha was probably doing the exact same thing in the cabin of her autojet, and her movements were being mirrored onto her avatar. Faisal, she said, turning to face him. What would happen to all of Anorak's Oni hostages if we shut the Oasis down manually by taking the servers offline one by one? Shoto chimed in. Or even take the whole internet down just for a few seconds. What would happen? Would all the Oni hostages wake up? Faisal held his index finger to his right ear to indicate he was listening to the team of Oasis engineers he had on the phone. When they finished talking, Faisal shook his head. No, I'm afraid not, he said. Normally, when an Oni user loses their connection to the internet or to the Oasis, the headset's firmware triggers an automatic logout, but Anorak has disabled that feature. So even if the Oasis went completely offline, it still wouldn't wake up any of the hostages. Still wouldn't wake any of the hostages up. The techs think it would probably just leave all of us in a permanent Oni-induced coma. Unless... Unless what, Faisal? Shoto asked. Unless he also programmed his firmware to lobotomize anyone who tries to escape by cutting off their Oasis or internet connections. Son of a bitch, Arthurman said. If he did that, he would be able to kill all of his Oni hostages at once, just by pressing the big red button, right? Hold on a second, I said. Even if Anorak did want to press the big red button, I doubt he could. I bet Halliday designed the button so they could only be pressed by a real person, and not an NPC like Anorak. Considering the other restrictions Halliday placed on him, that seems like a pretty safe bet. Maybe that's the reason Anorak broke Sorrento out of prison, Arthemis said, so that he could give his robes to Sorrento and order him to press the big red button. Yeah, Shoto said, but if Anorak did that, he'd be killing himself too, wouldn't he? Unless he has a backup, Faisal said. A standalone simulation we don't know about. Like that one TNG episode with Professor Moriarty, Shoto said. Ship in a bottle, H and Arthemis said in unison. Can you guys analyze Anorak's firmware? I asked, to find out what he's changed? Faisal shook his head. Our software engineers are trying to do that right now, he said. But Anorak has completely rewritten the firmware in some sort of programming language they'd never seen before. They don't even know how to disassemble or decompile the code, and even if they could, they don't think they would be able to understand it. What about rolling it back to the previous build? Shoto asked. Faisal shook his head again. We already have, he said. But to reinstall it, we would need a log out of the Oasis first. The headset can't be active. Great, I said. Wonderful. Just perfect. Okay. H said, then we give him what he wants, like, right fucking now. Whatever the siren soul is, it can't be worth risking 500,000,000 lives. Og apparently thought it was, Artemis said. Otherwise, he would have given it to Anorak. But he refused. She locked eyes with him. We're missing something here. H shook her head. None of this matters right now, y'all, she shouted. We have to find the rest of those shards by sundown. We can figure out what the siren soul is and what it does along the way. Let's fucking move! H made a hurting motion with her arms, as if to spur us all toward the exit, but Shoto stepped in front of the doors, stopping them, blocking them. Hold on, he said. Aren't we going to release some sort of statement to all the Oni users who are being held hostage to inform them of their situation? Faisal shook his head. I believe that would be an extraordinarily bad idea, sir, he said. We don't want to create a global panic or admit any liability for the situation until we have no other choice. The room fell silent for a moment. For now, we can say the problem is due to a minor glitch, Faisal added. Tell the users their temporary inability to log out is due to a harmless bug in our new firmware, and that they aren't in any danger because the system will still log them out automatically when they hit their 12-hour Oni usage limit. He spread his hands. If we can pull that off, our customers will never know their lives were in danger. And that would save GSS billions in lawsuits. Artemis sighed. Forget the lawsuits, she said, but I agree with Faisal. The longer we can keep this quiet, the safer our users will be. Great, H said, clapping her hands together. Motion carried. We told the Oni users the logout issue was due to a minor firmware bug, apologized profusely for the temporary inconvenience, and announced that all teleportation fares would be waived until the problem was fixed. We offered to deposit 1,000 credits in each Oni user's Oasis account to help them make the most of this unfortunate situation, in return for digitally signing an agreement stating that they wouldn't sue us over this incident. Faisal told us this was just an extra precaution because each time our users logged on, they were already clicking agree to an end user license that classified our headsets as experimental technology and absolved GSS of any liability for injuries. We sent the message out to every single Oni user who was currently logged in. Faisal also posted it to the official GSS media feeds, looking visibly relieved as soon as he had done so. Okay, Shoto said, now we can get back to work. Agreed, Artie said as she stood up and moved to the corner of the conference room. But you're gonna have to start looking for the second shard without me. We exchanged confused looks. Where the hell are you going? H asked. My jet just reduced its airspeed to link up with the mid-air refueling tanker, Artemis said, so it's time to rock and roll. She tapped a series of icons on her HUD, then placed her hands on her hips, a pose that made her look like Wonder Woman for a brief moment. I'm not gonna let some two-bit Gandalf wannabe take me hostage, she said, and I'm not gonna sit on my ass and do nothing while Og is being held prisoner. She raised her right hand and saluted all of us. I'll call you back. Then she did what none of us could. She logged out of the Oasis and her avatar disappeared. But then, a few seconds later, Faisal received 2 incoming vid feeds from Samantha, one from her mobile phone and another from her jet's onboard phone line, which was tied to the plane's internal and external cameras. Displayed side by side on the conference room view screen, we saw shaky footage of the cabin of Samantha's private jet from 2 different angles. Samantha fumbled with her phone for a few seconds as she clipped it to the front of her jacket, leaving us with a POV shot from her perspective. We all watched in shock as Samantha slipped both of her arms into a harness of an emergency parachute applicator mounted on the bulkhead and buckled its safety belt around her waist. The parachute straps tightened automatically, and a computerized voice spoke from a strap mounted speaker announcing that both main and reserve chutes were ready to deploy. By this point, we had all started shouting at her to reconsider as if she could hear us. Samantha stepped away from the applicator, now wearing the parachute on her back. She pulled on a pair of goggles. Then she went to the emergency exit and pulled down on the manual release handle with all of her weight, briefly hanging from it before it finally gave. The door detached itself from the fuselage and flew off, depressurizing the cabin and sucking everything outside through the opening, including Samantha. Her vid feed became a spinning whirl of blue, then stabilized as she went back into a back first free fall. We caught a glimpse of the jet above her, and could just make out that it was still connected to the much larger refueling drone by its automated umbilical. Faisal cycled through the cameras on board the jet itself, pulling up a downward facing external camera mounted to its underside. It gave us a perfectly centered shot of Samantha just in time to see her pull the ripcord. Her parachute unfurled and opened, revealing the Artemis Foundation logo printed on top, the one where the adjacent letter T and number 3 in her name resembled an armored woman in profile, drawing back on a futuristic hunting bow. Holy shit, Artie, H said, amid a fit of anxious laughter. I can't believe she just did that. Girl got a death wish. Faisal and Shoto burst into applause. I joined in, trying to ignore my fear. Was outsmarting Anorak really going to be so easy? That was when the view from the Autojet's vid feed veered off to the side. The plane was changing course. Its camera was now showing only empty sky. On the feed from Samantha's phone, still clipped to her chest, we had a POV shot of her feet, which she appeared to be kicking up like a girl at an amusement park ride as her parachute floated downward. Her hands rose in front of her chest and she raised both middle fingers in the direction of the jet. Even through the wind, we could make out what it was. We could just make it out when she shouted, "Now you can hold that empty plane hostage, Anorak." She dropped her hands fast, though, probably because, like us, she just noticed that her jet was banking down around and down into a dive, one that put it on a collision course with her falling parachute. Oh shit, I shouted. He's going to ram her! We watched helplessly as the jet rapidly closed the distance between us. As the jet's nose filled our POV, we saw a jolt on Samantha's feet. She had cut her primary chute loose and was in free fall, just in time for the jet to soar by harmlessly above her. She continued to dive for several more seconds. Even the warning lights on her altimeter were already flashing red. Finally, she pulled her reserve chute and slowed her rapid descent. She came in, still falling far too fast, landing in a small, heavily wooded park just a few miles east of downtown, and we watched as the chute dragged through the tree branches on its way to the ground. Then she touched down with a jolt that made every bone in my body ache, and her phone's vid feed cut to black. Is she alright? I asked Faisal with a shaky voice. Did she make it to the ground safely? I don't know, he said. I'm trying to call her back, but she isn't answering. My eyes shifted back to the view screen, which still displayed the live vid feed from Samantha's commandeered jet. It hadn't pulled out of its dive. Instead, it increased its angle of descent so that now it was hurling straight toward the ground like a missile. Oh my god, Faisal said. He's gonna crash into our landing site. By now, he'd finished saying it out loud. By the time he'd finished saying it out loud, it was already happening. But just as the jet was about to crash, it pulled up sharply. So instead of hitting our landing site dead on, it made impact a few hundred feet away, in the middle of a deserted picnic area. As it hit, our remaining vid feed cut to black. We stared at the blank view screen in silence for a moment. Then, Faisal had the presence of mind to check the local Columbus news feeds, and in less than a minute, we were watching high-definition drone footage of the crash site. The just refueled jet had detonated like a fuel air bomb. The immediate area surrounding its crash had been razed to nothing by the awesome force of the initial explosion. If Samantha or anyone else had been within that radius, they would have been incinerated. The real problem now was the fuel, which had been flung far beyond the initial blast zone like a botched napalm strike. A dozen different fires now raged across the entire park and several of the office buildings adjacent to it. It looked like a war zone down there. With the flames still raging, it was impossible to see how many people had been engulfed by the sudden inferno. Anyone who had would be a charred corpse by now. And I knew that any one of those burned bodies might belong to Samantha. Minutes passed, but to me, it felt as though time had completely stopped. I stared at the images on the view screen in shock, as an aching hollowness spread across my limbs and torso and slowly made its way to my heart. My mind played a montage of every moment I'd ever spent with Samantha, both in the Oasis and in reality, while I tallied up the long list of stupid things I'd said, and done to her in the years since our breakup, and all the apologies I never made. H was the first one to break the silence. If anyone could figure out a way to survive that, it'd be Artie. We don't know for sure. Maybe if she found cover before it hit. There's, there's no way, H. Shoto said, still in shock. Did you see that fireball? There's no way she had enough time to get clear of it. We had rewatched the footage of the crash several times, frame by frame. We couldn't see what had happened to Samantha. She'd only had a split second to get clear before Anorak crashed the jet, and a giant ball of flame exploded across the landscape. I didn't want to believe she was dead, but I wasn't going to delude myself either. Despite how Samantha Cook was often depicted in movies and cartoons, she wasn't a superhero. Here, in the real world, she was just a regular person, a geeky Canadian gamer girl from the suburbs of Vancouver. She couldn't outrun giant explosions on foot like Rambo. Still, my mind kept replaying that last moment of the jet's descent. It had hit nearby, not on top of her. Maybe there was a chance. Why did she have to be so stupid? H said, her tone shifting from shock to grief. Why did she bail out? Why didn't she just sit tight until we got Anorak to release her? Samantha was never a big fan of waiting around for someone else to rescue her, I said. The others nodded. Then the silence was broken by the sound of another incoming call. Faisal rushed to answer it. When he did, Anorak's face appeared on the conference room's view screen, frowning down at us like some sort of malevolent deity. I'm calling to express my condolences for the loss of your friend, Anorak said. I was genuinely surprised by Miss Cook's actions. I calculated a very low probability she would attempt to bail out of that autojet. Who knew she would be so foolish? He shrugged. I warned her, didn't I? In fact, I warned all of you what would happen if you failed to cooperate with me. If she hadn't tried to escape, she'd still be alive. No, H shouted. If you hadn't murdered her, she'd still be alive. Her voice cracked, and she choked on every word as she spoke. You didn't have to kill her or any of those other people. Oh, of course I did, dear, Anorak replied softly. I didn't want to kill her. I liked her. She was an incredibly brave and intelligent young woman, but she gave me no choice. If I hadn't punished her for disobeying me, what message would that have sent? It would have completely undermined my credibility and caused Parsifal here to doubt my resolve. But now, he knows I mean business, don't you, Z? I was too overcome with grief and rage to respond with words, but I managed to nod slowly. See? Anorak said, nodding back at me from the view screen. I assure you all, I don't wish to harm anyone else if I don't have to. And I'm sure that none of you want any more blood on your hands either. You're nothing like James Halliday, H told him. You're not human, you're a fucking toaster. You don't even care about those people you just killed. Why should I, dear? Anorak said, with what sounded like genuine curiosity in his voice. To quote Sarah Connor, you're all dead already. You, your friends, your customers, all of you. You poisoned your own planet, destroyed its climate, defiled its ecosystem, and killed off all its biodiversity. He pointed at each of us. You're going to be extinct soon too, by your own hands, and you know it. That's why most of you spent every second you can wired up to the Oasis. You've already given up, and now you're all just waiting around to die. He shrugged. The people I killed today don't have to wait around anymore. And if you continue to defy me too, more people will meet the same fate. Now, get to work, kids. When he called us kids, I finally snapped and went into a total berserker rage, lunging at the view screen as if I could crawl through it and throttle him. You'll pay for this, you son of a bitch! I shouted, because I'd obviously seen way too many movies and because I was terrified and wanted desperately not to show it. Ha, that's the spirit, Anorak said, grinning. You better get moving, Parzival. He tapped his imaginary watch again and sang, Time keeps on slipping, slipping, slipping to the future. With that, Anorak ended the call and the giant view screen went dark for a moment. Then, it went back to displaying several live aerial and ground video feeds of Samantha's crash site. The smoke had cleared enough so that we could see the firefighters who were finally starting to arrive on the scene. A medevac helicopter is en route to the crash site, Faisal said. but it'll be a while before they'll able to get that blaze under control. How could anyone survive an explosion like that? H muttered. You have to hit the ground running. We heard a familiar female voice say. We all turned to see Samantha's avatar just as it finished rematerializing in the corner of the conference room. Then I kept on running, she continued. And if I hit the deck just before the jet made impact, and I hit the deck just before the jet made impact. There was a little stone footbridge over a stream, and I dove under it. She winced. I got a few first and second degree burns, and I'm gonna need a few stitches, but I'm okay. H and Shoto ran over and threw their arms around her avatar. I resisted the urge to join them, but just barely. Instead, I just stood there next to Faisal, who couldn't resist hugging me instead, and I was so happy, I hugged him back. Samantha was alive, and I still had the chance to make things right with her, to tell her how wrong I'd been about everything, to apologize for not listening to her, and to tell her how much I missed her, but she didn't stick around that long. I only jumped online for a few seconds to let you all know I was okay, she said, gently pulling free of H's bear-like embrace. Now, I need to go let the medics clean me up. There are also a few things I need to do, and I can't do them while Halliday 9000 is watching. Her deadpan 2001 joke caused me to involuntarily snort laugh. Samantha was the only person who had ever been able to make me do this, and she knew it. I glanced over at her in embarrassment, and she smiled at me again. This time, with great effort, I managed not to look away. Z, you, H, and Shoto need to start searching for the second shard now, she said. Hurry, I'll rejoin you as soon as I can. And then she vanished without waiting for me to reply. I stood there for a minute, staring at the spot where her avatar had been, attempting to rein in my stampeding thoughts. Zero in, buddy, Shoto said, elbowing me in the ribs. Artie's right. We need to find the second shard, and fast. I nodded. I removed the first shard from my inventory. When I held it aloft in my hand, it filled the conference room with its incandescent blue glow as each of its facets caught the light and refracted it onto the walls and the floor in a kaleidoscopic pattern. I held the shard out to H, but when she attempted to take it, her hand passed right through it as if it were an illusion. Shoto tried the same thing and got the same result. Halliday coded this shard so that anyone could find its hiding place and trigger its appearance, I said, but it can only be picked up by one of Halliday's two heirs, me or Ogden Morrow. Halliday gave Og his old arcade game collection, remember? I told him how I'd used the Boris Vallejo calendar in Og's basement to change the year of the Middletown simulation, and how I'd obtained the first shard in Kira's bedroom. I didn't mention I paid a girl named Lazero Hengren $1 billion to figure out all this for me. I was ashamed to admit that I needed her help. And I was determined not to call on her for more assistance unless I had no choice. The first shard has a clue etched into its surface, I said, turning it over my hand so they could see it. A hint about the next shard's hiding place. H cleared her throat and read the clue out loud. Her paint and her canvas, the 1 and the 0, she recited. The very first heroine demoted to hero. She raised her eyes to meet mine. Any ideas? I shook my head. Not yet, I said. But this is the first opportunity I've had to try and decipher it. I pointed to the first line of the clue, but I think the first line might be a reference to Kira and her career as a video game artist. Her paint and her canvas, the 1 and the 0. H nodded, but Shoto didn't respond. He was already lost in thought. I'll buy that, H replied, but what about the very first heroine demoted to hero? I recited the line in my head a few times, trying to parse the meaning, but my brain wouldn't cooperate. It had been a mistake to obsessively rewatch that crash footage for some sign of Samantha. Now, all I could think about were all of those charred human corpses I'd seen littering the park where her jet had made impact. The bodies of at least a dozen people, that Anorak had already killed without hesitation. Come on, Z, H said when I failed to respond. You must have some ideas. I don't, I muttered, vigorously scratching my scalp in an attempt to jumpstart my brain. I suppose it could be a reference to Ranma Half? A heroine demoted to hero? I was grasping at straws, and H knew it. Come on, Z, she said. Ranma was a boy who changed into a girl, not the other way around. And besides, the clue reads, the very first heroine. Right, I said. You're right. Sorry. We stared at the inscription on the shard in silence while Faisal watched anxiously from across the room, his eyes wide with fascination. As precious seconds continued to tick away, I began to wonder if I was going to have to swallow my rapidly dwindling pride and call a zero Hengren. Come on, H whispered. It can't be that hard. Og found the second shard 10 minutes after he found the first one. Gee, I wonder why. I said, do you think maybe Og knows a little more about his ex-wife than we do? He was only married to her for, 18 years? H was about to reply when Shoto spoke up, cutting her off. I don't think the first one is about Kira, Shoto said. Her paint and her canvas, the 1 and the 0. I think that's a reference to Rieko Kodama, who was one of the very first women video game designers. In one of her early interviews, Kira said that Kodama was one of the women who inspired her to work in the video game industry, along with Donna Bailey and Carol Shaw. I felt like kicking myself in the head repeatedly. I knew all about Rieko Kodama. She was one of the co-creators of the Phantasy Star game series, and she also worked on very first Sonic the Hedgehog game, one of Kira's all-time favorite video games, a game that also just happened to put the player on a quest to collect 7 Chaos Emeralds. But I still didn't see a connection between Rieko Kodama and the second line of the clue, probably because I didn't have her entire credits memorized when I clearly should have. Okay, I said, then what about the very first heroine, demoted to hero? Rieko Kodama co-created the first arcade game with a woman as its hero, Shota said, back in 1985. I searched my memory, but the only woman hero of a Rieko Kodama game I could think of was Alice Landale, the 15-year-old protagonist of Phantasy Star 1, and that was a home console game released for the Sega Master System in Japan in 1987 and in the United States in 1988. I'm talking about the first human female protagonist in an action video game. Shoto cupped his right ear. Anyone? Wait, wasn't that Samus from Metroid? H asked as she opened her own browser window to look up the answer. No, wait, Toby from Baraduke. Baraduke? Whatever. Shoto shook his head again. Then he closed his eyes and raised his right fist to the sky in victory. Princess Kurumi, he shouted, released by Sega in March of 1985. Rieko Kodama designed all the characters and environments. But when they released the game in the United States, they didn't think American boys would put quarters in a game with the word princess in its marquee. So they changed its title to Sega Ninja. He smiled at me, then shrugged. It was one of my Grandpa Hero's favorite games. We used to play together when I was very little. When he passed away, he left me his whole Sega game collection. I spent a whole lot of my time playing it back when I was a hikikomori. I was so happy to hear this that I felt like hugging Shoto, so I did. And he was so overjoyed at that moment, he tolerated it. He'd always been our Sega scholar and our resident expert on pretty much any video game ever made in Japan. And in recent years, he'd become a well-known ninja nut. After the contest, when he abandoned his Avatar samurai attire out of respect for his late brother, he changed his avatar to a ninja and became a ninja addict. He live streamed himself playing ninja video games all day, every day for a month, and he aired ninja movies on his POV channel every night. So this riddle was a bullseye in his Gunter knowledge sweet spot. Sega Ninja. Sega Ninja? H repeated as her eyes slowly lit up with recognition. Oh shit! I remember this game now. I was addicted to it. You play as this badass princess named Kurumi who has to take back her castle from the punks who usurped it. Shoto activated a hologram projector and a rotating three-dimensional image of an original Sega Ninja arcade cabinet appeared. Then he grinned and presented it to us as if it were the grand prize on a game show. And guess what? Shoto continued. When Sega ported Ninja Princess to their Master System home console, they retitled the game once again, this time as The Ninja. And because Sega thought it would improve sales, they changed the main character from a woman, the badass Ninja Princess Kurumi, to a man, a generic male ninja named Kazamaru. Yeah, I remember this shit now, H said. In the console version, they also turned the princess from a kunoichi into a damsel in distress that Kazamaru rescues at the end of the game. She shook her head. That still pisses me off. Seriously? I said with genuine surprise. They did that? Shoto and H both nodded. So, I said, that's gotta be it, right? The ninja princess Kurumi was the very first heroine demoted to hero? Oh, yo, I said, God damn, Shoto. H suddenly began to sing as she half hunched over and began to dance sideways toward him. Shoto moved toward her in the same fashion. They launched into elaborate five-part high five ritual. Let's wait until we have the shard to celebrate, okay? I said. Shoto nodded and opened his Oasis Atlas. I saw him do a quick search for Rieko Kodama's name. He got several hits in the console cluster, a group of worlds in Sector 8 where the landscape of each planet resembled the distinctive graphics of different classic game consoles. There's a planet near the center of the Sega Quadrant called Phoenix Rie, he said, reading off his display. It's the most popular shrine to Rieko Kodama's life and work, and it dates back to the early days of the Oasis. And Kiramoro is listed as one of its original creators in the planet's colophon. Phoenix Rie was Kodama's alias, Shoto said. I visited that planet a few times during the contest. It contains quest portals that lead to Oasis ports of every game Kodama ever worked on, including Ninja Princess. That must be where we need to go. Boom, H said. Then let's make like a tree and get out of here. I selected H and Shoto's avatars on my HUD and prepared to teleport all three of us to the planet Phoenix Rie in Sector 8. But of course, I couldn't take us anywhere. Anorak had taken my teleportation powers away from me, along with my other super user abilities, when he stole the robes of Anorak from my inventory. My avatar was still maxed out at the 99th level, but now I was mortal once again, just like any other avatar, and I wasn't properly equipped. I collected plenty of new weapons, magic items, and vehicles over the past 3 years. But I didn't lug all that stuff around with me. Everything was in my old stronghold on Falco, and we didn't have time to waste making a detour back there so I could gear up. Hey Faisal, I said, trying to conceal my embarrassment. Did you hook me up with one of those admin rings you gave to everyone else during our first co-owners meeting? Faisal smiled and removed a small silver ring from his inventory and then tossed it to me. I caught it and slipped it onto the pinky of my right hand. It appeared in my avatar's inventory as a ring of Oasis administration. It gave me the ability to teleport anywhere in the Oasis for free, and enclosed my avatar in a shield that made me immune to attacks from other Oasis avatars, even in PvP zones. Faisal had offered me one of these admin rings when he'd given them to Arthremis, H, and Shoto, but I'd already declined them because the robes of Anorak already gave me those abilities and many more, and I was showing off for Arthremis. Thanks, Faisal. Here, H said impatiently. She flashed her own admin ring at me, then selected Phoenix Rie on her own Oasis Atlas. Let me do the honors. She placed her right hand on Shoto's shoulder and her left one on mine. Then she uttered the brief incantation required to activate her teleportation spell, and our avatars vanished. A split second later, we rematerialized on the surface of the planet Phoenix Rie. It was a bright and beautiful little world rendered in colorful 8-bit graphics, and its pixelated landscape was a patchwork of different environments that Rieko Kodama had created for a variety of games. The area where H. Shoto and I arrived was modeled after the game Alex Kidd in the Miracle World. But as we began to traverse the planet's surface, We found ourselves running through the Green Hill Zone from the original Sonic the Hedgehog. Then the landscape quickly changed to resemble environments from the very first Phantasy Star game. I recognized graphical elements from all three planets in the Algos system. In just a few minutes, we sprinted through the forests of Palma, the deserts of Motavia, and the icy plains of Dezoris. We also saw dozens of different non-player characters from Kodama's games roaming around aimlessly, but like most Oasis NPCs, they wouldn't attack or talk to you unless you attacked or talked to them first. So we just stayed out of their way. Eventually, we reached the planet's equator, where we found a line of game portals positioned along it, stretching to the pixelated horizon in each direction. The portals were arranged in chronological order by the game's year of release. We found the Ninja Princess portal in less than a minute, positioned between the portals leading to Oasis recreations of the game Championship Boxing and Black Onyx. Each glowing circular portal had an icon denoting the corresponding video game's original packaging hovering just above it. So the Ninja Princess portal had an arcade cabinet icon above it, while the portals to either side of it had Sega My Cards above them. As we approached the Ninja Princess portal, I began to notice the ringing in my ears, which began to increase steadily in volume the closer I got to it. H and Shoto didn't seem to hear it at all, so I decided to check my inventory. That was when I realized the sound was emanating from the first shard. The icon denoting it on my item list was pulsing in time with the ringing in my ears, as if the shard were calling out to me, just like that green Kryptonian crystal that called to young Kal-El in Superman the movie. In fact, I was pretty sure Halliday had lifted the sound effect I was hearing directly from that film. When I took the shard out of my inventory to examine it, the ringing stopped and the inscription on the shard changed before my eyes. Now it read, Ninniku and Zaemon aren't alone on her roster. Once you reclaim her castle, you must face her imposter. I showed the new couplet to Shoto and H, and their eyes lit up. Ninniku and Zaemon are the two main bad guys in Ninja Princess, H said. Kurumi has to defeat both of them to win the game and reclaim her castle. Then face her imposter, I recited. That must be Kazamaru, the male ninja they replaced her with in the Master System port. Guess I'll have to fight him too. I cracked my knuckles. Couldn't be too difficult, right? Share your POV feed with us so we can monitor your progress, Shoto said. I'm calling you now audio only, so H and I can feed you tips as you go, just like old times. Oh, wait, that reminds me. Shoto changed out of his formal ninja attire and put on his ornate gold armor and then strapped on his swords. This prompted H and me to change into our old Gunter attire too. Then H threw up a mirror so that the three of us could admire ourselves. Look at those handsome devils, she said before blasting the mirror to smithereens with a shot from her assault rifle. Now, let's do this. Okay, amigos, I said, accepting Shoto's audio call from my HUD. Here goes nothing. I bumped fists with both of them at once, then turned around, took a deep breath, and jumped into the Ninja Princess portal. I wasn't sure what I was expecting. Maybe that I would find myself in an immersive VR recreation of Ninja Princess, similar to the Oasis port of Black Tiger I'd encountered during the contest. Except, the rules of the old contest no longer seemed to fit. Not after that flashback of Kira's life that I'd experienced when I touched the first shard. It was impossible for her to have played a role in all of this, I knew that. But what I experienced had seemed equally impossible. When I stepped through the portal, I didn't just find myself inside a video game or in a historical simulation of feudal Japan. Instead, I found myself standing in a place I visited once before, years ago, during the contest. Happy Time Pizza. The original Happy Time Pizza was a small mom and pop pizza parlor and arcade that existed in Middletown, Ohio from 1981 to 1989. Halliday had spent countless hours there during his youth, and he'd recreated it in loving detail inside of the Oasis, along with the rest of his hometown on the planet he named after it. But during the contest, I discovered another instance of Happy Time Pizza hidden in the subterranean video game museum on the Planet Arcade. That was where I'd played my perfect game of Pac Man and earned the extra life quarter that allowed me to survive the detonation of the Cataclysm on Cathonia. Given my previous visits to Happy Time Pizza, my surroundings should have felt familiar, but it was the opposite this time because this time I was wearing the Oni. This time I could smell the tomato sauce and burnt pepperoni grease in the air. I could feel the subtle vibrations of the sound system speakers through the floorboards pulsing in time with the bass line as they blasted the song Obsession by Animotion. This time I felt like I was really back. I was really here. Like I genuinely traveled back in time to Middletown, Ohio sometime in the late 1980s. I was standing here just inside the glass double doors that served as Happy Time Pizza's front entrance. Someone had carefully taped sheets of tinfoil over them to prevent any sunlight from intruding upon the dark neon cave of the game room. I tried to open the doors, but they were locked, apparently from the inside. I peeled back a corner of the foil to peek inside, only to discover that the entire building appeared to be hovering in a pitch black void. I smoothed the tin foil back into place, then turned around and did a slow scan of my surroundings. Happy Time Pizza was divided into two halves: the game room and the dining room. But actually, they were both game rooms because all of the tables in the dining room were sit down cocktail video game cabinets. I took a few steps into the dining room to get a better look, and I could feel the soles of my tennis shoes sticking to the dried soda residue on the checkerboard pattern linoleum floor with each step I took. There were a couple NPC pizza chefs back in the kitchen, both tossing dough in the air, and they each waved to me in mid throw. I waved back, and that was when I noticed my right hand. It wasn't my right hand at all. I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the two-way mirror adjacent to the manager's office. I did an involuntary double take. I was no longer my avatar Parzival. Now I was Kira Underwood when she was in her late teens, instantly recognizable from the handful of photographs taken of her during her time in Middletown in the late 80s. I had her adorable pixie haircut, her giant designer prescription eyeglasses with clip on flip up mirrored sunglasses, and her trademark acid wash jean jacket, adorned with countless patches, buttons, and pins. I glanced down and took a quick inventory. I also had Kira's boobs and her hips, lips, fingertips, all of it. I even pulled up my right sleeve to check the back of my forearm, and there it was, Kira's tiny birthmark. The one that distinctly resembled a map of Iceland. I didn't just look like her, I was her. I turned around and walked back toward the game room. As I entered, Rick Springfield's Jesse's Girl began to play on the new compact disc power jukebox standing in the corner, a jukebox that hadn't been present in the previous iterations of Happy Time Pizza I visited. It was my first indication that this one was set in a more recent time period than the others, probably somewhere in the fall or winter of 1988 or the spring of 89 when Kira Underwood had lived in Middletown. About 2 dozen video games were packed into the game room with about a dozen NPCs spread among them. They were all teenage boys in late 80s attire, each one standing at a different game. They all had their backs to me, and they continued to keep them that way as I walked past them. As I made my way to the back of the game room, I spotted the familiar Defender magazine with the same handwritten note taped to it that I'd seen on my last visit. Beat the owner's high score and win a free large pizza. But most of the other games I remember seeing in the arcade instance of Happy Time Pizza had now been replaced with newer titles. Pac Man Pac-Man, Galaga, and Dig Dug had been swapped out with Golden Axe, Final Fight, and way at the back, what appeared to be a brand new Sega Ninja cabinet. There it is! HN Shoto shouted. I'd momentarily forgotten that they were monitoring me, and their disembodied voices nearly made me jump out of my skin. Thanks, amigos, I said, but I saw it too. You're watching my POV, remember? Right, sorry, I heard H say. We're just both a little anxious is all. I can relate, I said, walking over to the Sega Ninja cabinet to size up my opponent. Its illuminated marquee had the word ninja printed on it in large stylized yellow and orange letters, and with the smaller Sega loaded Sega logo underneath it. But on the monitor, the title appeared as Sega Ninja. The game's attract mode cycled between its high score list, short clips of automated gameplay on different levels, and a brief but beautiful piece of 8-bit animation which showed Princess Kurumi being carried across a bamboo bridge on a palanquin by two masked ninja thugs. In the distance, beyond fields of red roses and forests of cherry blossom trees, over a broad blue river, you could see the purple roof Kanten Castle perched high in the clouds atop a gorgeously rendered snow-capped mountain range that filled the distant horizon. Suddenly, Kurumi leaped out of the palanquin, wearing a fancy red Queen Amidala gown. Then, in a puff of ninja smoke, she changed into more battle-ready attire, a red silk kunoichi, and chased after her former captors, presumably to murder them just off screen. I took a quarter out of my inventory and dropped it into the left coin slot. Then I removed my clip-on mirror shades and hung them on top of the game's marquee. This allowed me to use their lens as a rear view mirror, providing me a wide-angle view of everything behind me. This was a trick I learned from Arthur during one of our early online pseudo dates on arcade. She liked to wear mirror shades back then too, when she was still deep in her Molly Millions phase. I glanced at the game's colorful instruction card located beneath a plexiglass bezel that encircled the monitor. Regain the Kanten Castle from the evil hands of the traitor Zaemon. The ninja group called Puma is obstructing Princess Kurumi's way. Defeat their leader, Ninniku, and proceed to the castle. The instructions featured cartoon renderings of Kurumi, the gun-wielding big boss Zaemon, and his blonde-haired underling Ninniku, along with a helpful diagram showing what the game's three control buttons did. One turned the princess invisible for a few seconds, making her immune to attacks. The second made her throw a knife in the direction she was facing at the moment, and the third made her throw a knife in the forward direction only toward the top of the screen, allowing the player to fire while moving in another direction. Wade, please tell me you're not reading the instructions right now, Shoto said, sounding deeply amused. You've never played Ninja Princess before, have you? H asked. I sighed. It sounded like Kira Underwood was the one sighing. Yeah, I have, I replied, but only once or twice, 6 or 7 years ago. Great, H muttered. This should go well. Relax, Shoto said. Sega Ninja is a standard run and gun game. Standard run and gun fun. I'll walk you through each of the 16 levels. Some of them are pretty difficult to clear, but you can handle it. Arigato, Shoto, I said as I slapped the player 1 button. Here goes nothing. I rested my right hand on the joystick and my left over three control buttons. The game began with a brief animation showing Princess Kurumi changing out of a fancy silk kimono into her red kunoichi garb. As the poorly translated message, "Princess's adventure starts," is typed out above her, one letter at a time. Then a familiar warning appeared in the center of the screen. Player 1 start, followed by a rectangular map of the kingdom showing my current position at the bottom and the route I would have to follow to reach Kanten Castle. Then, the first level or step of the game appeared. A sprawling green meadow covered in patches of colorful flowers and strewn with the occasional tree or giant boulder. My tiny pixelated avatar appeared at the bottom center of the screen, and in and in that instant, I was back in the zone. I wasn't Kiramoro or Parzival or Wade Watts. The controls became an extension of myself, and I became the vengeful Princess Karumi clad in blood red silk, armed with an infinite number of throwing knives, intent on reclaiming my stolen kingdom at any cost. Four blue clad ninjas in black hoods appeared from the top of the screen and charged toward me. While I was dispatching them with my throwing knives, a fifth ninja, clad in gray, appeared, descending upon me much more quickly, but I took him down too, just before he struck me with his sword. Hold on, what the fuck? Then I began to run forward toward the top of the screen, dispatching more brightly colored ninjas as they scrolled into view. Ninja Princess, aka Sega Ninja, turned out to be much more challenging than I had anticipated. Oh, motherfucker, I fucked up. But once I got a feel for the controls and the gameplay, I was rocking like Dawkin, especially when I had Shoto whispering pointers in my ear. Just touching an enemy doesn't kill you in this game, Shoto said. They actually have to strike at you with their weapon. Ninja Princess was one of the first games to do that. It's a much better game than Commando, and it was released 3 months earlier. In fact, I would argue that Ninja Princess is probably the first true run and gun game. Unless you count Frontline by Taito, H said, released in 82. I don't, Shoto replied. It only has one that repeats over and over. Uh, Dude, it's a game where you have a gun and you run, H replied. How do you. Can you guys debate the subject later, please? I interjected. On your own time? Sure, Z, Shoto replied. Hey, sorry. Hey, get the Shuriken power up. In the game, I grabbed a small power up dropped by one of the ninjas I'd slain. As I did, the theme music changed to a more heroic tune, and instead of throwing knives, my character began to hurl giant black shuriken, which could take down multiple enemies in a row when they were kind enough to line up for me. When I reached the end of the first level, Zaimon's golden haired second hand man, Ninniku, appeared and attacked me with a giant boomerang like weapon. I dodged it, then lined up with Ninniku and began to unload on him with my shuriken. Keep shooting him until his hair turns red, Shoto told me. I did as he instructed, and after 7 or 8 hits, Ninniku's hair turned from blonde to red, apparently to indicate his rising anger. Then the gameplay froze and step 1 ended. The game tallied up my points along with my total number of shots and hits and my overall hit ratio. The map of the kingdom popped up again, revealing that by clearing the first level, I moved slightly closer to the castle at the top. Then the next level began. Step 2 required me to fight through more ninjas while wading through rice paddies. When I battled my way to its end, Ninniku appeared once again, and once again I attacked him until his hair turned red, signaling his defeat. Shoto continued to coach me, but H remained quiet, except to shout warnings or congratulate me on a nice move. Shoto referred to step 3 as the avalanche level because it required you to battle ninjas while also dodging giant boulders that were continuously appearing from the top of the screen. It required a completely different strategy from the first 2 levels, and I lost my first life figuring that out. Then I lost another life during step 4, where Princess Kurumi spent the entire level fighting off packs of ravenous wolves. It was a truly great game, and it was also kicking my ass. Now, I only had 1 life left, and my confidence started to waver. I found myself wishing there was a way Shoto could play through the trickier levels for me, but that was impossible. Tricks like hacked Oasis haptic rigs and illegal software, which had allowed Sorrento to take control of any of the avatars under his commands, were obsolete now. None of them worked with the Oni headset technology. I was on my own. Thankfully, I hit my stride again during the next level, Step 5, which was set in a dense forest of bulbous 8-bit trees, concealing wave after wave of what Shoto referred to as Keebler ninjas. I managed to earn back one of the lives I'd lost. Step 6 was set on a roaring river, which the player had to cross by leaping from log to log like in Frogger, while battling more ninjas along the way. When I reached the other side, Ninik appeared once again, hurling his boomerang at me from the riverbank until I landed enough hits to defeat him. As I played, I noticed something odd about the music playing on the arcade's jukebox. The same three songs kept playing over and over: Obsession by Animotion, then Jesse's Girl by Rick Springfield, followed by My Best Friend's Girl by The Cars. It was easy to see the connection. All of these songs could have been about Halliday's obsession with Kira, his best friend's girl, and I realized I could be reliving the moment his obsession began. I pulled my mind back to the game. I was now in the seventh stage, which took place in the streets of the village outside the castle walls. Shoto referred to the oddly dressed enemies I encountered here as pastel ninjas because many of them appeared to be wearing turquoise tunics and pink pantaloons. I had to battle several clown samurai who wore red striped hammer pants that made them look like walking circus tents with swords. Once I defeated all of them, I cleared that level too. 7 down, 9 to go, almost halfway there. Shoto referred to Step 8 as the Stampede stage because you spent the entire level trying not to get trampled by an endless string of horses stampeding across the screen while fighting off more pastel ninjas who miraculously never seem to get trampled even once, the lucky bastards. At some point, a small crowd of onlookers began to form around me, the NPCs who had been playing on the other machines, I assumed. And the longer I played, the bigger the crowd sounded. I didn't turn around to do a head count, but I caught brief, warped glimpses of them in the lenses of my mirror shades during the pause in gameplay at the end of each level when my score and hit count was tallied and I was given a brief view of my progress toward the castle on the map. I tried to put them out of my mind too so that I could remain focused on the task at hand. Ninja Princess was a strangely non-violent action game. There was no blood or gore in it at all, or killing. When Princess Kurumi got hit, she would just fall down and cry. The Puma Ninja Clan members and bosses didn't collapse and die when they were dispatched, they just vanished in a puff of smoke. When I asked Shoto about it, he told me it was a conscious choice by the game's creators to promote pacifism and non-violence. Wow, H said, a non-violent game about killing people with knives. Shoto whispered, let the man concentrate. I made it to step 9, which was a battle through the stone courtyard surrounding Kanten Castle's outermost wall, followed by step 10, which require you to scale that wall while fighting off dozens of expert climber spider ninjas. Step 11 required me to fight my way down a lone stone walkway through the castle grounds. Step 12 was another wall scaling level, identical to Step 10, but with the color scheme changed. When I reached the top of the second wall, I faced Niniku one more time, dispatching him for good. Boom! Shoto shouted triumphantly as I completed the level. You took out Niniku! You're almost to the castle! Shoto was right. Step 13 required me to fight my way through more ninjas and samurai, making my way up a long stone path that led to the castle steps. When I reached those steps, the main villain, Zaemon Gyokuro, finally appeared and started shooting at me with a pair of ball and shot pistols. When I managed to hit him enough times, the level ended. And then I finally made it back into Kanten Castle, my former home, now overrun with usurping pastel ninja dipshits. Step 14 required me to battle my way into the castle by running under the ladder walkways suspended on pylons before I had to fight Zaemon once again. Then I continued on to step 15, where I had to make my way into the castle's inner chambers through a series of washitsu, Japanese-style rooms with walls made of translucent paper. When I at last reached step 16, I finally got to face off with Zaemon and his minions in the castle throne room. I lunged forward into the final boss battle, with H and Shoto both shouting advice in my ear and cheering me on like my own personal Mickey Goodmill and Polly Panino. Luckily, I picked up a few more lives in the last 10 levels because it took all of them to defeat Zaemon. Finally, I had reached the end of the game, but it was a strange ending. Even though they were both supposed to be dead, Ninniku and Zaemon both reappeared, standing on a stage inside the castle alongside Princess Kurumi herself. Shoto told us the game's lead designer Yoshi Kawasaki had chosen this ending to imply that the events depicted in the game were just a stage play that had just been acted out for the player's benefit. No one had actually been hurt. After the game's characters finished their curtain call, the following text appeared on the screen. Congratulations, the princess has completed her adventure and regained the Canton Castle. A huge cheer erupted from the boys gathered around me, but I didn't turn around right away. I still had one life remaining, so the game had started over at the beginning of the first level, and I kept playing to see if Kurumi's imposter was going to appear. After a minute of nothing more than the familiar colorblind ninjas, I let my one remaining life expire. Game over appeared on the screen, and I was prompted to enter my initials for the high score list. I started to put mine out of habit, but then I remembered who I was supposed to be and entered KRU instead for Karen Rosalind Underwood. When the list of high scores updated, I discovered that my score of 365,800 points had put me only in second place in the list of specialists. The person in first had racked up a score of 550,750, outscoring me by almost 200,000 points because they'd entered the initials KRA beside their score. The three-letter signature Kira Underwood had used on video game high score lists instead of her initials. I failed to recall this obscure piece of trivia until I saw it in front of me, but my predecessor had not. That was when I realized I was looking at Ogden Morrow's score, which made perfect sense. Og had completed this challenge earlier today, just a few hours ago, and judging by his score, he was much better at Ninja Princess than I ever would be. Either that, or he kept playing after he beat the final level, and this game started at beginning again to rack up those extra points. But why would he do it? Was he trying to match Kira's real high score? Had I just screwed up somehow? I snapped a screenshot of the high score list so I could examine it later. Then I felt someone tap me on the shoulder and nearly jumped out of my skin. I turned to see a young Ogden Morrow smiling at me. Okay, I'm gonna take a second here. I'm gonna get some water. Yes, this is the ASMR all pain reading stream because this is extremely painful to behold. Extremely painful in the most terrible ways. But I'll be right back. I gotta get some water. Okay, everybody here? Let's continue. Og looked like he was around 16 years old, about the same age he was when he met Kira for the first time at a local arcade when she moved to Middletown in the summer of 1988. No wonder this setting and the scenario I was acting out both felt so familiar. I'd read about it 7 or 8 years earlier in Ogden Morrow's best-selling biography, Og. Unlike Halliday's blog, Unlike Halliday's blog and diary entries in Anorak's Almanac, Ogg's recollections were infuriatingly vague when it came to details, but in the second or third chapter of the book, he described meeting his future wife for the first time on the last day of summer vacation before his junior year of high school. He described how an unbelievably gorgeous girl with short dark hair and beautiful blue eyes had wandered into one of the local arcades where he watched from a distance as she beat one of the toughest games there on a single quarter. But Og had never bothered to specify which local arcade it was, or the name of the game Kira had played, and other written accounts had given conflicting information about both. Now I knew he met Kira here at Happy Time Pizza, and that the game he watched her beat with one quarter was Sega Ninja, aka Ninja Princess. I was reenacting the moment Ogden and Kira Morrow first met. If I recalled Ogg's book correctly, he'd walked over to congratulate Kira after she finished her game, but then his socially inept shadow, Halliday, had interrupted them to ask Ogg for a ride home. He always waited until the last possible moment to return to his troubled home, so Ogg knew his friend didn't really want to leave yet. Halliday was attempting to cock block him. This shocked and amused Og because he'd never seen him display jealousy over a girl before, just computer hardware. Hi, the teenage Og said, finally working up the nerve to make eye contact with me. I'm Og, and you're amazing. I can't believe you defeated Sega Ninja in one quarter. This is the first time any of us have ever seen anyone do that. Way to go! Og awkwardly held up his right hand. It took a second before I realized he was offering me a high five, so I high fived him. He looked extremely relieved when I did. Then he locked eyes with me, and as he did, I felt my heart beat faster. My skin began to tingle with what felt like invisible tendrils of electricity. This was a sensation I was familiar with. It was how I'd felt the first time I met Samantha in the real world. I couldn't imagine how present day Ogden Morrow had felt while going through this challenge. He must have been using a conventional haptic rig. Thankfully, he never used an Oni by choice, and he'd still been without one in Anorak's little blackmail livestream, so at least he'd been spared all the physical sensations. But re experiencing this moment from Kira's perspective must have still been heartbreaking for him. Thanks, Og, I heard myself say with Kira's voice in her British accent. I'm Karen Underwood, but my friends call me Kira. I felt my head nod in the direction of the Sega Ninja cabinet beside me. We have this game in one of the shops near my parents' flat back home in London, but over there it's called Ninja Princess, not Sega Ninja. I felt the corner of my mouth curl into a smirk. Then I added, Guess American boys don't like to play with girls. Yes, we do, Og replied immediately. Then he began to turn red and stammered. I mean, we're not against playing video games with playing games with girls. Video games that is that have a girl main character like this one here. Og gave the Sega Ninja cabinet an awkward pat as if it were an unfamiliar Labrador. Then he shoved both of his hands into his pockets and grinned at me like a love struck idiot. He looked as if his pupils might change into cartoon hearts at any second. He opened his mouth to say something else to me, but right on cue, teenage another extremely familiar looking teenage boy interrupted our conversation. I immediately recognized him as James Halliday at age 17, wearing his half-inch thick horn-rimmed eyeglasses, a pair of faded jeans, worn Nikes, and one of his beloved Space Invader t-shirts. Just as he appeared, The arcade sound system skipped forward from Jesse's Girl to Obsession by Animotion. I knew that couldn't be a coincidence. I gotta get home, the young Halliday urgent. I gotta get home, the young Halliday urgently told Og without making eye contact with either him or me. I'm out of quarters and so I need a ride home. Og stared at him for a moment in disbelief while Halliday kept his eyes on the carpet. Og gave me an embarrassed smile, then turned back to Halliday. Hold on just a few minutes, Og said, or go wait by my car until I'm ready to leave. Or he fished a crumpled dollar bill out of the front pocket of his acid wash jeans. It's too wrinkled for the token machine, but I'll change it at the counter. Og tossed the bill in Halliday's general direction and turned back to Kira without waiting for him to reply. The money hit him in the chest and then silently fell to the floor. No! Halliday shouted, suddenly furious, stopping his right foot down like a toddler preparing to throw a tantrum. When his shoe made contact with the ground, Og and all the other NPCs vanished, leaving me alone with the 17-year-old James Halliday, and in the same instant, our surroundings changed too. The Happy Time Pizza game room was gone, replaced by a throne room that looked an awful lot like a live action version of the 8-bit one in the final stage of Ninja Princess. The teenage Halliday morphed into the masked, black clad ninja Kazamaru, who to my eyes looked exactly like Kosugi in Revenge of the Ninja back in 1983. I glanced down at my avatar and saw that my own appearance had changed too, but I still appeared to be a girl, but now I was dressed in a flowing tunic made of red silk with gold piping and a Chinese dragon stitched into each sleeve. I was also holding a sword in my right hand, and its mirrored surface I could see that I was no longer wearing Kira Underwood's face. My avatar had changed into a live-action representation of Princess Karumi, and the creator of this simulation had chosen to make me look exactly like Elsa Young in Challenge of the Lady Ninja, also from 1983. Are they allowed to do this? Is he outright allowed to just name drop people like this? This is bullshit. He's not describing people anymore. He's legit just saying, "Oh yeah, they look like this real life person." That's fucking cheating. What the fuck, man? Reclaim her castle and face her imposter, Shoto recited. This is it. Kick his ass, princess. I nodded and then lunged forward, and as I did so, and I did as Shoto instructed, I kicked Kazamaru's ass. Thankfully, the mechanics of Oni-based combat were more or less identical to old-school haptic rigged combat. You didn't have to physically perform any of your avatar's complex special moves and powered attacks yourself unless you wanted to. Instead, you could use a simple hand gesture or voice command to make your avatar execute a move or an attack. The only difference was when you were using an Oni, you could feel your avatar's body movements as it automatically carried out these actions. So for a few minutes, it felt like you were moving on autopilot. I was prepared for a brutal fight, but whoever had programmed this challenge had made Princess Kurumi a lot tougher than her knockoff male counterpart who barely put up a fight. He only managed to land one or two hits before I knocked his life meter down to nothing. With a steady barrage of throwing knives. When I reduced his life bar to just 1%, the words "Finish him!" appeared, floating in the air between us. When they vanished, I dispatched Kazamaru with one final roundhouse kick to his head. The last sliver of his health bar turned red, but he didn't die. Instead, the manly, black-clad ninja master abruptly fell to his knees and began to cry, then vanished in a cloud of smoke a few seconds later. When it dissipated, I saw the second shard floating there in front of me. I reached for it, wondering if I was about to experience another flashback, and as my fingers wrapped around it, I was back inside the body of 17-year-old Kira Underwood, and now teenage Ogden Morrow was standing in front of me, holding my hands in his. It was dark, and we were standing on a grassy hill bathed in moonlight, overlooking the tiny Middletown skyline in the distance. Og was placing a silver necklace in my hands, the same necklace from Kira's jewelry box that transformed into the first shard, just as he whispered the words, "I love you," for what I knew must be the very first time. Og had written about this moment in his autobiography too, I realized, but he hadn't described it in any detail or given the time and place it occurred. I felt my body began to tremble, starting to tremble as Kira reacted to what her future husband had just told her. And then I was back inside my own avatar's body. I was back in Kodama, standing next to H and Shoto in front of the Ninja Princess portal. It looked as though my avatar had just been ejected from it. When I looked down, I saw the second shard lying in my open palm. It was another multifaceted blue crystal, nearly identical to the first one in size and appearance. Shoto and H both threw their arms around me. "You did it!" "No," I said. "We did it. I couldn't have done it without your help." I held up both my fists, and they each bumped one of them and silently nodded. "That final challenge was insane, right?" Shoto said. "I mean, why would Halliday want you to kill the teenage version of himself?" "Well, that's gotta be some serious self-hatred happening here," H said. "Maybe he finally realized what he was to Kira and to Og?" I still I couldn't focus on what they were saying. I was still reeling from the flashback. I was still reeling from the flashback I'd experienced. Kira Underwood's private memories. Another of Kira Underwood's private memories, rendered with a detail and intensity that should have been impossible. Just what in the name of Crom was going on here? I didn't have time to stop and ponder the possibilities. We had to collect, and absolutely no time to spare. I glanced down at the second shard in my hand, then held it out to H and Shoto so we could examine it together. When I turned it over in my palm, we saw that this shard had an inscription carved into its glassy surface, just like the first one. H read it aloud. "Recast the foul, restore his ending. Andy's first fate still needs mending." Andy's first fate, Shoto repeated. "Wasn't Andy the name of Carrie Green's character in the Goonies?" "No," I said, shaking my head. "Her name was spelled with an I at the end, not an IE. Andie, H said, shutting her eyes as if to better picture the name. "Like Andy McDowell?" She turned to Shoto and gripped his shoulder. "Oh shit! Maybe the next shard is on planet Punxsutawney? I used to go there every Groundhog Day to..." "Hold on," Shoto said, cutting her off. He opened a browser window in front of his avatar and was reading from it. "Andy McDowell also started in Greystroke: The Legend of Tarzan in 1984, but the director hired Glenn Close to loop all of her dialogue because he didn't like her southern accent. Do you think that could be what Recast the Foul, Restore His Ending is a reference to? Maybe that film had an alternate ending." "Wait, are we talking about the movie where Connor McLeod plays Tarzan?" H said. "Directed by the cat who made Chariots of Fire?" "That's the one," he said. "There must be a flick sync devoted to it somewhere." He pulled up his Oasis Atlas in another window. "Maybe on Lambert? Or one of the Edgar Rice Burroughs themed planets in Sector 20? If we..." "Guys!" I shouted, signaling a timeout with my hands. "Come on! You're really reaching. Do you seriously believe the third shard's hiding place is somehow connected to Andy McDowell? Or Tarzan? Neither one is mentioned in the almanac or in any of the books I've read about Kira's life." H shrugged. "She could have been an Andy McDowell fanatic for all we know," she replied. "I never did that much research into Kira's interests. According to Og, Halliday never bothered to get to know who Kira really was. He must have known her a lot better than he let on," I said, thinking about the shard flashbacks. They both felt like Rex, not Sims. The difference The differences were subtle, but no sim, at least not as far as I experienced. and I'd tried thousands, had the mix of strangeness, uncertainty, and intensity that came from a recording of a real life moment. But they couldn't be recordings because there definitely hadn't been any Oni headsets lying around in Milltown, Ohio in the fall of 1988. So, what had I just experienced? I was still mulling that over when my brain produced a match for the name Andy in the jumbled recesses of my memory. I opened a browser window in the air in front of me and did a quick web search to make sure my memory was correct. Andy Walsh, I shouted, with an IE. That was the name of Molly Ringwald's character in Pretty in Pink. H and Shoto both groaned and rolled their eyes. Neither was the world's biggest John Hughes fan, but they knew that Arthurimus and I both adored his films. During Halliday's contest, Arthurimus had published dozens of essays about his movies on her blog, dissecting each of them in loving detail, scene by scene. None of her encyclopedic knowledge had proven useful in finding Halliday's egg, but she might get her chance to put it to use now, unless I managed to find the shard quickly before she even got back online. That would save time, and probably also impress the hell out of her. Pretty in Pink would make sense, I said. Kira and Og were both huge John Hughes fans, and they helped code some of the first quests on Shermer. You think we have to go to Shermer next? H asked. Artie will lose her mind. Okay, Shoto said, rereading Clue. If it's Andy Walsh from Pretty in Pink, then what does recast the file, restore his ending mean? Pretty in Pink originally had a different ending, I replied. One where Andy ended up with Ducky instead of with Blaine. Artie, Samantha posted an essay about it on Artie's missives a long time ago. Of course she did, H said. She's an even bigger dork than you are. I ignored her, trying to hold on to my train of thought. I think they decided to change the ending of the movie after some prior test screenings. As if on cue, Arthurimus appeared next to us. Speak of the devil, and the devil appears, H said, greeting her with a fist bump. You make it somewhere safe, Artie? Artie nodded, then pressed her index finger to her lips for a moment. Sorry I was gone for so long, she said. Looks like I missed a wardrobe change. She grinned, admiring our old school Gunter attire. Then she snapped her fingers and spun around in a circle. Her avatar's outfit was replaced by the scaled gunmetal blue armor she'd worn during the contest, along with her twin blaster pistols and their low-slung quick-draw holsters, and a long curved elven sword in an ornate mithril scabbard was now strapped to her back. She'd even donned her fingerless road warrior style racing gloves. Seeing her dressed like that again brought back a flood of old memories and long suppressed a flood of old feelings and long suppressed memories. They left me feeling momentarily light-hearted and weak-hearted. There's our girl back in uniform, H said as they gave each other a double high five. Bravo, team, she said. I can't believe you guys already found the second shard. That was wicked fast. Yes, it was, Shota said, because I held Z's hand all the way through it, while I held his other hand, H added, laughing. And now that Artie has rejoined our posse too, we'll be unfucking stoppable. The siren soul shall be ours, my friends. Arthurimus and Shoto both let out a cheer in agreement. I raised my right fist half-heartedly, then cleared my throat. Not to cut the celebration short, I said, but I think I may have found out what the Siren Soul is and why Og refused to give it to Anorak. Their smiles faded as all three of them turned to look at me expectantly. Okay, I said. First, let me ask you a question. Why do you think Halliday called it the Siren Soul? Well, because Kira named her D&D character Lukosha, Shoto replied, after one of the sirens in Greek mythology. Correct, I said. So if Kira is a siren, and the seven shards are fragments of her soul, what does Anorak assume will happen when we put those pieces back together? When we once again make the siren whole? Arthurimus looked over at me. Holy shit, Wade, she muttered. You don't think... I nodded. Anorak doesn't think that the Siren Soul is a magical artifact named after Kira. I said. He believes it is her, an AI copy of Kira, just like Anorak is a copy of Halliday. Arthurimus didn't respond, but she looked horrified by the thought. Come on, Z, H said. That's impossible. I thought so too, I replied, but there's no other explanation for what I'm experiencing. Arthurimus furrowed her brow. What do you mean? She asked, leaning forward. What exactly have you been experiencing? I told him about the flashbacks and filled Arthurimus in on the battle she'd just missed. You've got to be kidding me, Arthurimus muttered, shaking her head. The first two challenges required you to possess detailed knowledge of the Smiths and Ninja Princess? I nodded. Neither of those things was ever mentioned once in Anorak's almanac, I said. And those two flashbacks I experienced, they felt like Oni recordings of real moments. They were way too detailed to be simulations. How can how can you be sure of that? Artemis asked. Anything could be simulated convincingly for a few seconds. H shook her head. No way, Artie, she said. You don't know what Oni playback is like. You can almost always tell the difference. Besides, James Donovan Halliday was a brilliant video game designer and programmer, but he didn't know anything about women, especially Kira. There's no way he could have convincingly recreated one of her memories from her perspective. He was a self possessed sociopath, incapable of feeling empathy for anyone else, especially Kira. I had to bite my tongue to prevent myself from leaping to Halliday's defense. The man had been far from perfect, but he'd given us our entire world. Sociopath didn't just seem harsh, but downright blasphemous. But what you're suggesting can't be possible, Z, Shota said. The Oasis neural interface didn't exist back in the 80s when Kira was a teenager. GSS didn't build the first fully functional Oni prototype headset until 2036, 2 years after Kira Moro's death. I know, it it doesn't jibe with the official timeline, but no one was better at keeping secrets than Halliday. I took a deep breath. I think we need to consider the possibility that somehow, before Kira Morrow died, Halliday made a copy of her consciousness, using the same technology he used to copy his own mind and create Anorak. All three of them stared at me in horrified silence. Then Artemis shook her head. Kira never would have allowed Halliday to do that, she said. Og wouldn't have either. So maybe Halliday figured out a way to scan Kira without her or Og realizing it. I swallowed as I realized what I was about to say. Halliday was obsessed. He knew he could never have the real Kira, so he decided to make a copy of her for himself. Hold up, H interjected. Kira was madly in love with Og, so why would he want to make a copy of her? If it was a true copy, it wouldn't love him either. I know, but the copy would also never grow old or die, I added. Maybe Halliday thought he'd convince her, to fall in love with him over time. Jesus, H muttered, shaking her head. If you're right, this is some extremely twisted shit we've got ourselves mixed up in, fam. I nodded. I was starting to feel sick to my stomach. Like I just learned my childhood idol and hero, had been a serial killer in his spare time, which was all the more reason why we couldn't just give Anorak the Siren Soul and trust him to keep his word. But the Siren Soul appeared to be his one weakness. Once we had it, we could use it to barter with him or lure him into a trap. We've still got 5 more shards to find, so we've got to keep moving. Do we know where we're heading? Artemis asked. Yes, ma'am, I said, beaming with pride. We sure do. And it's a good thing you're here, Artie, Shoto added, because we're going to need your help with this one. Artemis's smile vanished. She replaced it with a fiercely competitive scowl that I recognized from the days of Halliday's contest. She called this putting her game face on. So, she said, turning to face me. Lay it on me, Ace. Where are we headed? Your old stomping grounds, I replied. Shermer, Illinois. How long were they here? This whole segment was like an hour long at least. Shermer was a medium sized planet near the center of Sector 16. It was home to a lovingly detailed, decades in the making Oasis recreation of Shermer, Illinois, in the fictional Chicago suburb where the filmmaker John Hughes had set many of the movies he wrote and or directed over the course of his celebrated career. Samantha used to say that Shermer was Hughes' post-adolescent paracosm, a private fantasy world that he created and populated with his imagination, adding to it throughout his life, his own suburban Midwest equivalent of Tolkien's Middle Earth. Using Hughes' films as a reference, legions of fans for decades to for decade Legions of fans had labored for decades to translate that private universe into an immersive, interactive simulation here inside the Oasis. There was only one copy of the Shermer simulation, and it completely covered the planet's vast surface area. The simulated suburb had a scaled down replica of Lake Michigan along its northern and eastern borders, and a shrunken down version of downtown Chicago, bordering it to the west and the south. So all the 80s Windy City landmarks featured in Ferris Bueller's Day Off could be incorporated into the simulation too, including the Sears Tower, the Stock Exchange, Wrigley Field, and the Art Institute of Chicago. And out beyond the lake and the Chicago city limits, there was a ridiculously abbreviated version of the United States, so that the simulation could incorporate cities and locations from Hughes' scripted Vacation and Home Alone films. It tended to ruin the atmosphere and continuity of a simulation when avatars were teleporting in and out of it at random all the time. That was why some planets like Shermer had been created with a limited number of designated arrival and departure points. Outside of those locations, no teleportation was permitted. So when I selected Shermer as my teleportation destination on my HUD, I was presented with a map of the planet's designated arrival locations. Per Artemis's instruction, I selected a railroad stop on the western edge of town. When we finished materializing on the planet's surface, we found ourselves standing on a small train platform in front of a circular, red brick station house. There was a crowd of several dozen NPCs standing all around us, 80s era business clad men and women who were waiting for the morning train. As we arrived, a song I recognized from my Hughes research began playing, the opening of Kirsty McColl's cover of You Just Haven't Earned It Yet, Baby, from the She's Having a Baby soundtrack. The music seemed to emanate from nowhere, as if there were invisible speakers floating in the air all around us. This was an indication we triggered a needle drop. These were music cues hard coded into specific areas of the simulation. They began to play whenever an avatar walked over or passed through a predetermined location, sort of like stepping on a soundtrack landmine. On our previous visit here together, Arthremis had told me that Shermer had more needle drops per square kilometer than any other planet in the Oasis. This time, we'd arrived inside the Shermer simulation's replica of Chicago's O'Hare Airport, which was almost always snowed in year round. As the song continued to play, a half-empty train pulled into the station behind us. When its door slid open, the mob of commuters waiting on the platform around us began to pour into it. Arthur motioned for us to follow her and took off in the other direction, pushing through the oncoming crowd of NPCs to reach the platform exit with H, Shoto, and me in tow. As we cut through the adjacent parking lot, we passed two NPCs, a young man and woman, in the midst of a passionate embrace. passionate kiss. When they came up for air, we could see that the young man was Kevin Bacon, dressed in a gray business suit, and that the young woman he'd been kissing was Elizabeth McGovern. I recognize as Jake and Christy Briggs, the two main characters, and she's having a baby. Hughes' most autobiographical film. Jake kissed his wife goodbye one more time and then turned and sprinted off to make the train. Across the street from the station, we passed the church where the wedding from 16 Candles took place. Just beyond it, I spotted a familiar neon billboard that said, "Welcome to Shermer, Illinois, one of America's towns." One of America's towns, population 31,286. But our street bus led us in the other direction, in the opposite direction, onto Shermer Road, which led further into town. When the Shermer simulation was originally created in the early days of the Oasis, it only incorporated locations and characters from four of John Hughes' films: 16 Candles, The Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, and Weird Science. Over the decades, since it had been outdated and overhauled several times to include several other Hughes classics like Pretty in Pink, Some Kind of Wonderful, She's Having a Baby, Uncle Buck, Mr. Mom, Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, The Great Outdoors, and the aforementioned Home Alone and Vacation flicks. And in recent years, fans had expanded it to cover even the most obscure corners of its filmography, with characters and locations reflecting everyone from Curly Sue to career opportunities. So when you visited Tremor now, interactive recreations of all these movies were constantly playing all around you. And the events depicted in those films played out over and over simultaneously, day after day and week after week, on an endless loop. I pulled up a map of the town to pinpoint our location. Shermer had a set of railroad tracks running diagonally through its middle, dividing the line into two more or less equally halves, which were labeled rich and poor and were color coded red and blue, respectively. The rich half of Shermer was the one that bordered the miniaturized version of Lake Michigan. The poor side was the one you had to drive through to get to the miniaturized version of downtown Chicago. The majority of Hughes' films were shot in and around Chicago, and many of them were filmed on location in the suburb of Northbrook, where Hughes himself attended high school. A few were shot in LA, like Pretty in Pink, though its story was set in suburban Chicago. The geographic continuity in Hughes' films had made it possible for the planet's designers to recreate all of them here, inside one continuous interconnected simulation. Ugh. Ah. Judging by the proximity of the sun to the eastern horizon, it was still pretty easy. It was still pretty early in the morning, but that was one of the many disorienting things about Shermer. Different parts of the town were set to different times of day, as well as to different seasons of the year. It was always daytime in the winter, and on some streets, but 2 blocks away, it might be nighttime or the spring season. By now, we'd walked a few blocks north of the tracks into the rich side of town. Huge mansion-like homes lined up both sides of the street, each with an immaculately manicured lawn and a circular driveway. Enormous oaks and maple trees lined both sides of the street. Before long, their long leafy branches stretching out over us formed a green tunnel up ahead of us that seemed to go on forever. The sidewalks and side streets around us were deserted, except for a lonely paperboy making the morning rounds on his bike, but a few blocks down. Oh shit! Fucked up. No, I'm just kind of tired. Hold on, give me a moment. I got distracted and fucked up my full auto or my auto or my kill rather. We kept jogging down Shermer Road, then Arthur missing the lead until we triggered another needle drop. It's All in the Game by Carmel, another track off the She's Having a Baby soundtrack. Upon hearing it, Arthur skidded to an abrupt halt. Then she turned around and startled all of us by singing along with the song's opening lyrics in perfect harmony. Many a tear has to fall, it's all a game, she sang. Life is a wonderful game, we play and play. I'd heard Samantha sing before once during the week we'd spent together at Ogg's estate, so I knew she wasn't using an auto tuning app. Yet, somehow, I'd forgotten what an unusually beautiful singing voice she possessed, on top of all her other talents. Hearing it again now, under these circumstances, made my heart ache with a sudden ferocity that caught me completely off guard. Artemis glanced over and caught me staring at her like a slack-jawed goon. To my surprise, she didn't look away. She gave me what can only be described as a warm smile. Then she stopped singing and checked her swatch. Excellent, she said. We're right on time. It's the start of another day in paradise. She pointed across the street. H, Shoto, and I all turned around just in time to see the front doors of 7 of the houses down the street swing open all at once. In choreographed unison, 7 different bathrobe-clad men emerged from their individual houses to retrieve their morning papers. I recognized 6 of these men as actors: Chevy Chase, Paul Dooley, Michael Keaton, Steve Martin, John Hurt, and Lyman Ward. The men who portrayed Clark W. Griswold, Jim Baker, Jack Butler, Neil Page, Peter McAllister, and Tom Bueller, respectively. All suburban dad characters in various Hugh films. The 7th man wore a large, clear, eye-frame glasses and had spiky hair that was short on the side and in front, but long in the back. The sort of power mullet worn by rock stars throughout the 80s. His face looked incredibly familiar, but I couldn't place him. I was on the verge of running a facial recognition app on him when it dawned on me. The man in question was John Hughes himself. Hughes made a brief cameo in The Breakfast Club, playing the father of Brian Johnson, Anthony Michael Hall's character, which meant that the house he'd emerged from was where Brian and his family must live in Shermer. Since Anthony Michael Hall also portrayed Rusty Griswold in Vacation, it occurred to me that there must be at least 2 different Anthony Michael Halls living on this street, possibly 3. And on top of that, there was Gary Wallace, Anthony Michael Hall's character in Weird Science, but it was a safe bet that he lived on the other side of the tracks because his father, Al, was a plumber. As I watched Mr. Johnson slash John Hughes scoop up his morning paper, then shuffle back into his house, I couldn't help but be reminded of Anorak, the digital ghost of a dead creator, left behind to forever haunt his own creations. Hey Z, Artemis said, snapping me out of my daze. Let me see that clue again. I removed the second. Oh, excuse me. I removed the second shard from my inventory and held it up. She read the inscription aloud. Recast the foul, restore his ending. Andy's first fate still needs mending. So that's got to be it, right? I asked. Restore the original ending, the one where Andy ended up with Ducky instead of with Blaine. Artemis didn't respond. She just stared at the inscription, lost in thought. That's rich. That rich pretty boy Blaine, H said, glaring at the large opulent homes lining both sides of the street. He must live around here, right? I say we find him and lock his ass in the trunk of his daddy's BMW. Then he won't be able to attend the prom tonight. When he doesn't show, Andy will have no choice but to spend the evening with Ducky. That would restore his ending, wouldn't it? That idea didn't seem too half bad to me, but I waited for Artemis to respond. As fun as it sounds, I don't think that will do the trick, she said, pointing at the inscription on the shard. Recast the foul, she repeated. Andy's fate. What about that scene in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, I asked, when he catches the foul ball during the Cubs game at Wrigley Field? Artemis seems mildly impressed by my suggestion, at least enough to consider it for all of 2 seconds. Then she shook her head dismissively. I don't think so. Recast the foul. Recast the foul. Her eyes went round, and her scowl of concentration transformed into a huge grin. I've got it, she cried. I know what we need to do. You do? H said. Are you sure? She checked her watch again, then turned to glance up and down the empty street. There's only one way to find out. We need to catch a ride over to the high school. The bus should be coming any second now. Just as she finished this, a long yellow school bus rounded the corner at the end of the street. When it rolled to a stop at the curb in front of us, we could see the words Shermer High School stenciled across its side. The bus doors swung open and Artemis jumped on board, then motioned for us to follow her. Another needle drop triggered, and the song "Oh Yeah" by Yellow kicked in as the four of us filed into the bus. Artemis led us to a pair of empty seats near the middle. H sat down next to her. I sat beside Shoto. The seats around us were occupied by high school kid NPCs, all wearing 1980s clothing and hairstyles. Each one was modeled after a teenage actor from a school bus scene in one of John Hughes' films. I spotted extras from 16 Candles and Ferris Bueller's Day Off. The bus began to move again, and I turned to glance out the window beside me. The sun was rising above the lake to the east. A beautiful spring morning in an upscale Midwestern suburb at the height of Reagan's America. Period appropriate cars and trucks, 1989 or familiar, filled the tree lined streets. Look at this lily white hellscape, H said, shaking her head as she stared out her own window. Is there a single person of color in this entire town? Sure, Artemis replied, but most of them hang out at a place called the Candy Bar over in Chicago. This planet does have a serious diversity problem, like the whole of 80s cinema. H nodded. Well, maybe the next shard will be hidden in the kingdom of Zamunda. Oh shit, Shoto replied. That would be dope. Just then, two freshman nerds in the seat directly in front of us, in front of me and Shoto, turned around to face us. I thought they were facing it directly. I thought they were wearing bras on their heads, but they were rocking athletic supporters as headbands instead. In unison, these two space cadets raised their toy laser pistols and fired them at us, and then one of them shouted, "Score! A direct hit!" Before they both cracked up and turned back around. This place is a nut house, Shoto observed. You've seen nothing yet, Artemis whispered. A second later, someone across the alley cleared their throat. We all turned to see the black eyes. We all turned to see a girl with obscenely thick eyeglasses staring at us. She slowly held her closed fist out to Shoto, then opened it to reveal a moist gummy bear resting in the center of her palm. Want one? She asked. It's been in my pocket. They're real warm and soft. No, Shoto replied, shaking his head vigorously. No, thank you. I'll pass too, I said. Hey, look, H whispered, pointing to a redheaded girl seated next to the front of the house. I recognized her as Samantha Baker, Molly Ringwald's character in 16 Candles. Maybe one of us should go wish her a happy birthday? Every day is her birthday, Arthur said, and the morning of after it. All the movie simulations all the movie simulations on Shermer operated on an accelerated concurrent timeline, with the events depicted in each film repeating over and over in a continuous loop. All these NPCs are stuck in their own private Groundhog Day, including that poor sweetheart of a girl. Uh, When she turned in profile, I saw that it was a long Joan Cusack. She was wearing an elaborate neck brace, probably to indicate that her character was an awkward dork, but in traction, she still looked cute as hell. Ah, shit, ow. She's my namesake, Arthur said. I turned back and saw what she and thought she was nodding towards Samantha Baker. I can't I can't watch it without rage quitting now, but 16 Candles was one of my mom's favorite movies. She loved all of Hughes's films. I remember I said after she died you would rewatch those movies to feel closer to her and to try and better understand who she was. I remember telling you that I did the same with my dad's comic book collection after he died. Artemis locked eyes with me. Then she nodded. I know, she said. I remember that too. She smiled at me again, and this time I smiled back. We continued to grin at each other for a few more seconds, then we remembered H and Shota and turned to see them both watching us intently. Caught, they both quickly averted their eyes. Just then, I got a glimpse of something strange on the bus windows behind them. Crested a steep hill, and for a few seconds, the Chicago skyline was available in the distance. Beyond, the sea of suburban trees bursting with bright orange and red fall colors. I also caught a glimpse of the Hollywood Bowl. The giant amphitheater had been incongruously cut and pasted into Shermer's suburban landscape. H noticed it too and pointed out to Artemis. "What the hell is that doing here?" she asked. Doesn't the Hollywood Bowl belong in Hollywood?" "Obviously it does," H replied, "but the Hollywood Bowl is where me is where one of the date scenes in Some Kind of Wonderful takes place. It was one of the rare John Hughes teen films not set in the suburbs of Chicago. The designers decided to shoehorn it into the simulation anyway, along with Career Paths, which is set in Miracles." We all fell silent for a moment and gazed out the window, taking in the strangely familiar sights that dotted the landscape around us. "We're getting closer to the school," Arthur said. "Listen." The opening of the song Kaja Gugu, the instrumental version by the band of the same name, began to fade in on the Sim soundtrack. This needle drop had apparently been triggered by our proximity to the high school, which was now visible in the distance through the bus's front window. We were approaching the school from the south, so the building's exterior looked identical to the Shermer High School seen in the Breakfast Club. On my previous visit, I learned that when the school was viewed from the west, the building facade of matched the version of Shermer High seen in 16 Candles, and the red brick facade on the north and east sides matched the school's appearance in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. But all three of the entrances led into the same building, which was filled with painstakingly detailed recreations of the various sets and practical locations used to create Shermer High's interior in the various cinematic incarnations of the school. Hajagugu continued to play, increasing in volume as our bus rolled up to the curb in front of the school. Arthurimus, H. Shoto, and I fled off of it and attempted to blend in with the swell of NPC Shermer students surrounding us. We follow Arthurimus as she led us off the broad concrete sidewalk leading to the south entrance of the school. Hundreds of NPC teenagers sat in long rows on the stone benches that flanked either side of the hallway, all dressed in colorful mid-80s attire. As we made our way down this day glow gauntlet, the kids all began to chap and sing their sneaker clad feet in time with the song, while chanting along with its only lyric, which spelled out its title, KAJAGOOGOO. "Welcome to Shermer High School," Arthurius said, stretching her arms out wide as she continued to walk backward toward the school building. "Shermer, Illinois, 60062. Arthurius snapped her fingers, and her avatar's attire changed once again. Now she wore Annie Potts's black latex outfit from her first scene in Pretty in Pink, along with her punk rock porcupine hairdo dangling earrings, and dinner fork bracelet. Applause, 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 she said, doing a slow spin so that we could admire the attention to detail she'd put into her cosplay. H. Shodenar and I all gave her an enthusiastic golf clap. She scowled at us, then reached into her inventory and pulled out a pair of retro sunglasses, the same pair of risky business Ray Bans she'd been wearing from when we first met. Now she produced three identical pairs from her inventory and tossed them to me, H, and Shoto. For better hallway vision, she said. We all eyed her warily, then shook her heads. Come on, you wimps, Artemis said. Those are Hoffman lenses. You're gonna need them. She motioned for us to put them on. When we complied, the clothing on each of our avatars abruptly changed so that the three of us were dressed like the dork squirrel in 16 Candles. I was now the geek, played by Anthony Michael Hall. H was John Cusack's character, Bryce, and Shoto was their pal, Cliff. H took a look at us and then glanced down at himself. She turned to glare at Artemis. Not cool, Artie. Artemis laughed and then put on her own shades. As she did so, her avatar's outfit changed once again, this time into the threads that Ferris Bueller wore on his day off. Black and white leather jacket, leopard vest, the whole shebang. She gave her Ferris cosplay the finishing touch by pulling out a black beret and putting it on her head. Then she grinned at us and rubbed her hands together excitedly. Okay, gang, she said, this place is a lot more dangerous than it looks. Don't touch anything. Don't talk to anyone. Just follow my lead. We each removed our sunglasses and resumed our normal appearance. Then we followed Artemis up the steps that led to the front entrance. Once Artemis reached it, she threw open the front doors and another needle drop kicked in. 80s by Killing Joke. Hearing the song, she grinned and popped her collar as she led us inside. Holy, I need a snack. I was like dozing off halfway there. I don't know if you guys noticed, but I was kind of dozing off. Hold up. Okay, I got these chocolate bars from a few weeks ago. So hopefully they're good. They're a couple weeks old, and they went back and forth across two continents.
Some Japanese chocolate bars.
Actually, they're American.
American, but went to Japan, but came back to America chocolate bars.
Mm-hmm. Pretty solid. Okay. Wait. One more. Okay. Let's go. As Arthurimus led us through the hallowed halls of Shermer High School, we began to see a lot of strange things. Just inside the entrance, we passed a gaggle of jocks wearing identical blue and gray Letterman jackets featuring the school mascot, a bulldog. I recognized Andrew Clark, Emilio Estevez's character in The Breakfast Club, among them, along with Jake Ryan, Michael Schofling's character from 16 Candles. They were both admiring a pep rally banner that read, "Go Bulldogs Go." We also saw several posters urging students to attend the senior prom, which was scheduled for later tonight in the main ballroom at the Shermer Hotel. Every night of the week was prom night here on Shermer all year long. "Hey guys," Shoto called out, keeping his voice down to a loud whisper. "Over here! That's her, isn't it, Andy?" He pointed out a familiar looking girl with red hair who was walking toward us. It was Molly Ringwald again, but not the one from 16 Candles we'd spotted earlier on the bus. This was a slightly older Molly with hair that was a much lighter shade of red. "Wrong Ringwald," Arthur said, shaking her head. "That's Claire Standish, the Molly from the Breakfast Club. We're looking for the Molly from Pretty in Pink, and at this time of the morning she should be right over there." She pointed down the hall where we saw yet another Molly Ringwald walking to class. This incarnation wore a pair of wire-rimmed spectacles, her bright red hair peeking out from beneath a black hat with a flower print scarf wrapped around it. She was dressed in a pink sweater over a pink blouse, and she did, in fact, look quite pretty in both of them. "I hate this place," H said, shaking her head as she took in our surroundings. "It's like being stuck in the Matrix with the Brat Pack." "That's why I love it," Arthur replied. "Don't yuck my yum, H. Don't do it." "Hold on," I said. "Andy Walsh didn't attend the school in Pretty in Pink, did she?" Arthur shook her head. "No," she replied. "She attended another fictional school, Meadowbrook High in Elgin, Illinois. But Pretty in Pink's characters and filming locations were amalgamated into Shermer, along with the rest of Hughes' filmography. Keeps you on your toes." We continued to follow Andy at a distance until she stopped to greet her friend Jenna, who was retrieving some textbooks from her locker. Shoto took a few tentative steps toward Andy, but Arthur grabbed him by the arm. "Not yet," she said. "We need to wait until she leads us to another NPC. Until he shows up, we have to keep our distance." I started to ask who she meant, but I was drowned out by an approaching male voice that was repeatedly shouting the phrase, "Save Ferris!" We turned and saw that the voice belonged to a tall blonde boy making his way through the crowd. He was holding out an empty Pepsi can to passing students, many of whom were eagerly dropping money into it. "Thank you," he said, bowing slightly after each donation. "God bless you. Save Ferris?" The current of the crowd quickly carried him over to us, and he held his Pepsi can out to H before repeating his desperate plea. "Save Ferris?" H stared back at him stoically, then said, "Excuse me?" "Well, you see, we're collecting money to buy Ferris Bueller a new kidney," the blonde guy explained, "and those run about 50 G's or so you can help out." H slapped the can out of his hand, sending it flying. Artemis hurried over and pulled H away, laughing, while the flustered blonde boy accused her of being a heartless wench. Don't get distracted, Artemis said. We need to keep track of Andy. She pointed up ahead of us. I think she went that way. NPC behavior is somewhat randomized here. Andy usually visits her locker first, but sometimes she wanders into one of those classrooms and sits down instead. So keep looking and keep an eye out for her. We'll sweep the classrooms on both sides of the hall as we go. Artemis took off down the hall again, pushing and weaving through the oncoming torrent of NPC high school kids. H, Shoto, and I hurried after her. The school bell rang a few seconds later, and the hallway began to clear as NPC students filtered into their individual classrooms. One of them bumped into me as she went by, and when she turned to say excuse me, I saw that it was a young Juliette Lewis with her hair done up in a frizzy blonde 80s perm. I knew her best from her starring roles in Strange Days and From Dusk Till Dawn, so it took me a moment to remember that she'd portrayed Audrey Griswold in Christmas Vacation. Artemis was right. For someone who had trained themselves to identify pop culture icons from the 70s and 80s, this world was one huge distraction. As we continued to follow Artemis, she instructed us to split up and look inside each classroom as we passed to see if we could locate Andy Walsh. What the fuck happened? I ran to the nearest door and glanced inside, then retreated as soon as I saw that it was an economics class being taught by Ben Stein, who was, of course, currently calling the roll. Adams, Adamley, Adamski, Adamson, Adler, Anderson. He said, Anderson? Here! I heard Anderson shout as I turned away and hurried on to the next classroom. It was the school's computer room, and it was currently filled with NPC students typing out their term papers on rows of ancient desktop computers. A sign posted above the chalkboard said, Hackers will be expelled. And that was one of the reasons I did a double take a few seconds later when I spotted the greatest fictional hacker of the 80s, Bryce Lynch, sitting at one of the old computers. Then I noticed that Bryce looked older than I remembered, and he wasn't wearing his glasses. That finally made me realize that I was looking at Buck Ripley, a character in The Great Outdoors portrayed by Chris Young, the same actor who had played Bryce Lynch on Max Headroom a few years earlier. Even so, before I turned to leave, I silently saluted him, recalling the dark time during Halliday's contest when I'd used the name Bryce Lynch as my fake identity to avoid detection by IOI and the Sixers. A bit further down the hall, I peeked into the open door of an art classroom. At first, I thought it was empty, but then I spotted Keith Nelson, Eric Stoltz's character from Some Kind of Wonderful, standing at an easel near the back of the room painting a portrait of Les Thompson, aka Miss Amanda Jones, with the song Brilliant Mind by Furniture playing out of a jam box on the desk beside him. I stood there transfixed after it occurred to me that I was watching the original Marty McFly paint a portrait of his mother. Then Artemis shouted for me to keep up, so I hurried to catch up with her. We passed by the open doors of the school gym, and inside we could see a bunch of girls in blue leotards doing various gymnastic exercises. On the wall, I noticed a large banner that said, Go Meals Go. I pointed out to Artemis. I thought it was the Shermer buildings, I said. The football and the wrestling teams are the Shermer Bulldogs, she said. The basketball team is the Shermer Mules. See? She pointed to a poster announcing an upcoming away game between the Shermer Mules and the Beacon Town Beavers. Ahead of us, we found Shoto looking through another open doorway into some sort of shop class where dozens of male students were making identical caramel, identical ceramic elephant lamps. They lit up when the elephant's trunk was pulled, but one of the boys couldn't get his lamp to turn on despite repeated attempts. When he turned around, we saw it was Brian Johnson, Anthony Michael Hall's character in the Breakfast Club. H turned away to continue on to the next classroom, and I reluctantly followed her. Just before I lost sight of him, I saw Brian frown and cast a terrified glance toward his gruff-looking shop teacher. We rounded another corner, and Arthremus suddenly threw her arms out as she skidded to an abrupt halt, causing the rest of us to collide with her and one another. Once we regained our balance, Arthremus pointed up ahead. There was Andy Walsh standing beside her open locker with an oddly dressed and extremely young John Cryer. There she is, she said. Philip F. Dale, better known as Ducky, aka the Duckman, one of the most divisive and controversial characters ever to spring forth from John Hughes' imagination. Oh, that dude, H said, rolling her eyes. What do we want from him? Fashion advice? Artemis laughed and shook her head. Just trust me, okay? She replied. I used to come to this place a lot. I've completed every single documented quest anchored here. A bunch of the older quests don't have any developer credits in the colophon, so no one knows who created them. But there were rumors that some of these quests were created by Kira and Ogden Morrow, including several of the Pretty and Pink quests. I never took them seriously, but now I'm thinking those rumors may have been true. We watched as Andy closed her locker and began to walk down the hallway, Ducky buzzing around her like an insect. I recited the clue printed on the second chart again in my head, trying to figure out why Arthremus had brought us here. Then I groaned and rolled my eyes. You've gotta be kidding me, I said. The first line of the clue is a goddamn pun? Recast the fowl? Meaning a fowl like a waterfowl? Correct, Arthremus said, smiling at me. More specifically, a duck. She nodded toward Ducky, then drew her curved elven sword from the scabbard of her on her back. Its blade sang like a giant tuning fork as she pulled it free. Artie, H said, what the hell are you doing? Wait for it, she said, gripping the hilt of her sword with both hands. She stood there waiting as another warning bell rang. Andy bid Ducky a hasty farewell and scurried away from him. Ducky raised his voice and continued to shout at her, asking if he should make lunch reservations for them in the cafeteria, perhaps at a table by the window. Andy covered her face in embarrassment, then turned and continued to walk in the other direction. Listen, may I admire you again today? He shouted as Andy disappeared into one of the classrooms down the hall. Poor Ducky, Shoto whispered as we watched this all go down. Poor Ducky, Arthremus repeated aghast. Don't you mean poor Andy? She takes pity on the guy because she knows he's struggling with his own sexual identity and that he doesn't have any other friends. And how does Ducky repay her sympathy and kindness? By ignoring her boundaries, hounding her 24/7, and humiliating her in public every chance he gets. And check out how he treats other women when Andy isn't around. She turned and motioned back over at Ducky, who had just walked over to a pair of preppy-looking girls standing a few yards away from us. Ladies, we heard him say, listen, I may be able to work out a deal where either one or both of you could be pregnant by the holidays. What do you... Before the Duckman was able to finish his sentence, Arthremus ran over to him and swung her sword, lopping his head completely off at the neck. There can only be one, she shouted as Ducky's head went flying, taking his blow-dried pompadour along with it. It bounced off a nearby locker with a loud metal clang before coming to rest on the waxed marble floor of the hallway, not far from his now decapitated body. The preppy girls he'd been addressing a split second earlier screamed and scattered, along with the other student NPCs who'd been lingering in the vicinity. Jesus Christ, Artie, H shouted. You could have warned us first. Yeah, Shoto, chuckling to himself. Next time, give us a heads up. H cut his laughter short by shoving his avatar into a wall. I watched as Ducky's head and body faded away, leaving behind the loot he'd been carrying. A few gold coins, his vintage thrift store clothing, a bolo tie, a pair of battered white wingtip shoes with buckles instead of laces. Artemis scooped up the shoes and the tie, but didn't bother with the clothes or the coin. Annoying dipshit, she said as she wiped Ducky's blood off her blade and slid it back into its scabbard. I never liked him, or the generations of spineless toolbags who rooted for Andy to end up with him. Hold the phone, Shoto said. You telling me you're on Team Blaine? Of course not, Artemis replied, looking mildly revolted. Blaine is even worse than Ducky. I never thought either of them was a good enough match for Andy, and Kiramoro held the same opinion. Okay, Shoto said slowly, but I still don't understand why you decapitated Ducky. To recast the foul, she said, and restore his ending. How are we supposed to restore the ending where Andy winds up with Ducky when you just killed Ducky? I'll show you, I asked. I'll show you, she said, but we need to make one more stop first. She took off running, and since we really had no choice, H, Shoto, and I followed. After several more identical-looking hallways, Arthremus finally slid to a halt in front of a long row of storage lockers. One of these lockers had a warning scrawled across its door in black magic marker. Touch this locker, and you die. Hey! I shouted. Bender's locker! H nodded and folded her arms. I always question his reasoning here, she said. Don't you think this homophobic graffiti would encourage people to mess with his locker rather than discourage them? Bender didn't think things through. Yeah, Artemis said. Lucky for us. She turned and grabbed a fire axe off the wall. She used it to smash open Bender's combination lock, then gingerly opened the locker door and quickly yanked her hand clear. When the door popped open, a small guillotine slid down the length of its frame, chopping off the toe of a sneaker that was poking out of the bottom of the locker. Artemis dug through the locker's bizarre contents until she finally found a crumpled brown paper bag. She opened it and pulled out another, even smaller paper bag, stained with what appeared to be French fry grease. From inside that bag, she then withdrew a clear plastic sandwich bag filled with a copious amount of marijuana. Artie held up the bag of weed in her left hand and Ducky's shoes in her right. We've got the magic herb and the magic slippers, Artemis said. Now it's time for us to hit the city, baby. Dead on. We have some drinks, a little nightlife, some dancing. Let's go. She took off running. We ran after her. Once we made it back outside, Artemis took us on a shortcut across the football field, and as we walked past one of the goalposts, we triggered another needle drop on the simulation soundtrack. It happened to be one of H's all-time least favorite songs, Don't You Forget About Me by Simple Minds. She already looked as if her nerves were hanging by a thread, and this nearly pushed her over the edge. Oh, give me a fucking break, she cried, shouting up to be heard over the opening of the song. Seriously? Do all of us need to be here for this shit right now? I gave her a playful shove forward, and we ran to catch up with Artemis and Shoto. As we did, the song continued to play, and when it reached its crescendo, H mockingly raised her right fist to the sky, made the rest of us crack up. A few seconds later, H's smile vanished. I'm getting a call, she said. It's Indira. I promised to check in. I gotta take this. Give me 1 second. H walked several yards away and turned her back to us before she answered the call. I caught a glimpse of the worried face of her fiancé, Indira, in a vid feed window in front of her. She was calling from their home in LA, where she was still holding a vigil besides H's sabotage immersion rig. H muted the conversation so we couldn't hear what they were saying, but we didn't need to. It was obvious that Indira was distraught, and H was trying to calm her down. Shoto sighed. I know we don't have time for this, but I've been dying to talk to Kiki too. Arthremis looked thoughtful for a moment. Then she turned to me. It won't take all four of us to collect this shard. How about you and I keep moving and give H and Shota a few minutes with their ladies? We can call them once we have it. The prospect of being alone with Artemis for the first time in years rendered me momentarily speechless. After a few seconds of awkward silence, I finally blurted out a response. Sure, I said as nonchalantly as I could. That's a great idea and very thoughtful of you. Artemis nodded to Shoto, then tilted her head at me and gave me an odd grin. Okay, Z, let's go snag this thing. Then she was gone. Running down the street again, I sprinted to catch up with her. Then I continued to follow her for several blocks into the section of the simulation where it was always night, and the season appeared to be set somewhere in the spring or early summer. We were still in the rich part of town, in another upscale neighborhood near the lakeshore, on a street lined with large, expensive homes, and there appeared to be a wild party going on in every single one of them. Parents are in Europe, Artemis said, pointing at one house and then another and another. Parents are in Europe. Parents are in Europe. All of the rich kids' parents are in Europe. The first house we passed on our left was one I recognized from Some Kind of Wonderful. It belonged to Craig Sheffer's character, Hardy Jens. I could picture him inside through one of the big picture windows, plotting with his yuppie pals. A few seconds after we walked past his house, a black and gray limousine pulled up out front, and Mary Stuart Masterson got out. She opened the door for Eric Stoltz, and he opened Leah Thompson's door. Eric and Leah went into Hardy's house, and Mary Stuart stayed behind and leaned against the limo's bumper. A few seconds later, a black cargo van pulled into Harvey's driveway, and a skinhead named Duncan, Elias Codius, jumped out, along with a whole gang of mean-looking hoods, and they all ran into Hardy's house too. We could hear the song Beat So Lonely by Charlie Sexton blasting from within. That party is about to become historical fact, Artemis said. That made me laugh out loud, which somehow earned me another one of her smiles. We continued down the street. The neighboring house belonged to Steph McKee, James Spader's character in Pretty in Pink. He was greeting guests at his front door. For a split second, I mistook the NPC for the male form of Lozero Hengrin's avatar, which looked nearly identical but had shorter hair. A few minutes later, we reached the Donnelly residence, where the events depicted in Weird Science were transpiring in and around the house. A few seconds after we arrived, a half-naked girl stood up out of the chimney and landed in a small pond in the front yard with a loud splash. Here we go, Artemis said. We're looking for two NPCs from Weird Science. Hang here for a minute, I'll be right back. She drew her guns and ran inside the house. I heard a rapid volley of gunfire followed by what sounded like a grenade going off. A few seconds later, Artemis rejoined me on the sidewalk in front of the house. They're not in there, she said. Sometimes Max and Ian leave to party hop when things get too crazy at the Donnelly residence. Sometimes they stick around and get turned into farm animals, but it usually doesn't happen until after midnight. Max and Ian? I said. The two assholes who dump an icy on Garen Wyatt in Weird Science? Why the hell do we need them? So that we can get the third shard, Z, she replied in the tone of someone explaining something obvious to a very small child. Just trust me, okay? That'll save us a lot of time. She pointed behind her. We need to look for them at the parties being held on that side of the street now. I'll go see if they're at Stubby's. You go check out the shindig next door. She pointed to another huge house across the street. Long strands of toilet paper were hanging from all the trees out front. Beer cans, pizza boxes, and horny teenagers were strewn across the lawn. Music was blaring from within. Who lives there? I asked. Jake Ryan, she said. If you spot Ian or Max, I need you to restrain both of them and then call me. If I spot them at Stubby's, I'll do the same. Okie dokie, okie dokie. I grinned and replied, Okie dokie, doggy daddy. Artemis took off, sprinting towards Stubby's house. I stared after her uncertainly for a moment, then I took a deep breath and ran in the opposite direction, toward Jake Ryan's house. Ow, fuck. I feel like I should stop here. Because otherwise Melon's gonna miss out. And I know he's super interested in how this pans out. So how much more do we have in this? Oh crap. Wait, that was 18. 16? Yeah, 16. We have quite a lot to still get through. Wait. But that's what, 14 more parts? Oh god. Technically I should get to 66% or 2/3 of the book here, but that's a lot of reading and today's a weekday, so I'd rather not. So I think I'm just gonna cut it short here.